Welcome, dear horror listener. You're tuning in to Frost Radio, and I'm truly grateful you're here. Whether you've been with us for a long time or just discovered this channel, thank you for joining me tonight. If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and means more than you know. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Share where you're watching from, what brought you here, or even what kind of story you'd like to hear next. Your support means everything, and I appreciate each and every one of you. Now let's get into today's horror story. Snow pressed down on the world like a heavy silence, muffling even the low growl of the 18-wheeler as it cut through the endless Alaskan night. The road was narrow, a lonely two-lane strip carved into the forest, where skeletal trees bent beneath the weight of ice and shadow. Inside the cab, Joe Mallory sat hunched over the wheel, the orange glow from his dashboard painting his face in tired colors. His thermos of coffee steamed faintly in the cup holder, its bitter aroma mixing with the smell of diesel and old leather. The radio was low, a faint hum of country music distorted by static, a companion more than an entertainment. Joe tapped, the steering wheel in time with the rhythm, his thick fingers scarred from years of handling freight lines and stubborn cargo straps. He'd been driving trucks for nearly 25 years and knew every kind of road America had to offer. Flat Midwest highways, twisting Appalachian climbs, and the desert stretches that seemed to never end. But Alaska was different. The road swallowed you here. It was too dark, too still. The snow never seemed to stop falling, and there were stretches where you could drive for hours and not see another pair of headlights. He yawned, jaw cracking, and rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hand. His logbook said he needed a break, and his body agreed. He'd spotted the old rest stop sign a mile back, its green paint faded, the letters half buried in frost. Good enough, he muttered. A rest stop meant bathrooms, a place to stretch, maybe even a soda machine. When he pulled off, the tires crunched over untouched snow. That was the first thing that nagged at him. The lot looked like no one had been there in weeks. No tire tracks, no footprints, just a blanket of white spread, smooth across the ground. His headlights cut across the lot, bouncing off the concrete block restroom building at the far end. A single yellow bulb glowed weakly over the entrance, swaying in the icy wind like a pendulum. Joe parked close, the engine rumbling low, and leaned forward to study the building. The bathroom door was open, swinging slowly back and forth. He frowned. The snow was untouched everywhere, and yet the door moved as if someone had just gone inside. He took a sip of coffee, grabbed his jacket from the passenger seat, and pulled it over his shoulders. The cold hit him like a slap the second he opened the cab. His boots sank deep into the snow as he trudged toward the restroom, breath puffing white in the night air. The only sound was the creak of that door, rocking slowly back and forth, its hinges whining. Inside, the air was wrong. It didn't smell like disinfectant or even like the usual stale urine these places carried. Instead, it reeked of damp earth, the heavy scent of soil turned wet after a storm. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed and flickered, casting the narrow tiled space in sickly hues. 3 stalls, 2 sinks, a broken hand dryer. The far stall door was shut. He stepped in, boots echoing on the tile. "Hello?" His voice sounded too loud, bouncing off the cinder block walls. No answer. Only the hum of the dying light. Then, faintly like a breath pulled between the cracks of the world, he heard it. His name. Joe. The whisper slithered from the direction of the last stall. He froze, heart hammering, sweat prickling despite the cold. The voice was soft, stretched thin, like someone speaking through soil. "Joe?" He swallowed, throat dry, and forced himself forward. His boots squeaked on the damp tile. He reached out with one calloused hand and pushed the stall door open. It swung slowly, groaning on its hinges. Empty. No shoes beneath the partition, no figure crouched there. Only the smell of damp earth, stronger now, rolling out in a suffocating wave. He stumbled back, pulse pounding in his ears. His eyes darted to the floor. The tile was wet near the stall, streaked faintly as if something had moved across it. He turned and looked back toward the entrance. The snow outside was smooth. No footprints led back into the night. For a long moment he stood frozen, the buzzing light flickering above him, the reek of soil clawing at his throat. Then he shook his head, muttered something about fatigue, and forced himself out into the cold. The parking lot was as silent as before. His rig waited, a hulking shadow with its headlights glowing like tired eyes. He climbed back into the cab, shut the door tight, and sat there gripping the wheel with white knuckles. The snow was falling heavier now, smearing the world in silver static. He told himself it had been the wind, the pipes, maybe a trick of his overtired mind, but as he shifted the truck into gear, something in him couldn't let go of the fact that the snow outside had been perfect, untouched. He eased back onto the road, tires crunching, headlights slicing through the storm. For miles there was nothing but black trees, white drifts, and the endless hum of the engine. He kept glancing at the mirrors, scanning the trailer lights behind him, searching for movement he couldn't name. The radio crackled and hissed, the country song dissolving into "Static, Joe," it whispered again, this time from the speakers. He slapped the radio off, heart thundering. The cab went silent except for the rattle of the heater. He gripped the wheel tighter and leaned forward, eyes straining against the storm. The road curved through a patch of forest where the trees leaned close, branches heavy with ice. In the corner of his eye, movement flickered, a shadow darting just beyond the reach of the lights. He snapped his head toward it, but the beam revealed only snow-laden branches bowing in the wind. Back to the road, eyes forward. Another whisper, softer now, brushing against the inside of his skull rather than his ears. "Behind you," he gasped, twisting in his seat, eyes sweeping the empty bunk behind him. No one was there, only his coat thrown over the passenger seat, his thermos still steaming faintly in the cup holder. The truck's headlights flickered, dimming for a heartbeat before surging back. He cursed under his breath, knuckles aching on the wheel. The CB radio crackled suddenly, though it wasn't even on. Static hissed through the cab, then cut with a sharp pop. He pressed harder on the gas. The rig surged forward, engine growling against the snow-packed road. His breath came short and ragged, his chest tight. He told himself he'd make it to the next town, pull into a diner, see other people, hear other voices. Just another hour. He could manage another hour. But then the road opened onto another pull-off, another rest stop. He blinked, confused. It looked exactly like the last one. The same building, the same yellow light swaying above the door, the same untouched blanket of snow. His foot eased off the accelerator. The truck slowed, coasting past the lot. His heart pounded in his throat. It wasn't possible. He hadn't looped back. He knew the route, had driven it a dozen times, and yet, it was the same place. The bathroom door swung slowly on its hinges. He pressed the accelerator hard, tires spinning before catching and pulling him forward. His pulse roared in his ears. The windshield wipers squealed against the frozen glass. He glanced once more into the mirrors, desperate to prove he wasn't losing his mind. And there, standing in the snow just beyond the trailer lights, was a figure. Tall, thin, still. Its face was shadowed, but the tilt of its head followed him as the rig barreled down the road. His breath caught, chest seizing. He blinked, and it was gone. The snow stretched smooth and empty behind him, but when he turned back to the road, his headlights swept across the shape again, this time standing in the trees at the edge of the forest, closer now, its head bent, at the same unnatural angle. "Joe?" The voice seeped into the cab, no longer from the speakers or the stalls, but from everywhere at once, pressing against his eardrums, vibrating in his teeth. He shouted, slamming the wheel, the truck swerving, slightly before he corrected, his vision blurred with tears of fear, breath ragged, hands trembling. The figure appeared again, this time in the middle of the road. He slammed the brakes, tires screeching on ice, the cab lurching violently as the trailer fishtailed. The headlights bathed the figure in pale light. Snow swirled around it. It had no face, only smooth skin stretched where features should be. Yet somehow, impossibly, he knew it was staring at him. The whisper came again, louder, vibrating the air inside the cab. "Come back," he screamed, wrenching the wheel, and the truck roared past the figure, missing it by inches. The cab shuddered. The trailer groaned, but he kept the pedal down, eyes wild, every muscle taut with terror. For miles he didn't blink, didn't breathe, just drove, snow hammering against the windshield, the road stretching endless and merciless ahead of him. Slowly, the whispers faded, the static died. The cab returned to silence, broken only by his ragged breathing and the engine's steady growl. Hours later, when he finally reached the lights of a small town, he pulled into a gas station and killed the engine. His hands shook, too badly to light a cigarette, so he just sat there, staring at his reflection in the windshield. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. He told himself he'd imagined it. That fatigue and loneliness had played tricks on his mind. That's what he repeated when the cashier asked if he was okay, when he poured a cup of burnt coffee and tried to steady his trembling hands. But when he stepped back outside, cup in hand, he froze. In the snow beside his rig, leading straight to the driver's door, was a line of footprints, perfectly pressed, leading only one way. The tires hummed a steady rhythm against the frozen asphalt, their vibration carrying through the steering wheel and into Daniel's hands. He kept both palms fixed at 10 and 2, partly from habit, partly from the quiet awareness that the highway beneath him was black ice in disguise. The heater whirred on low, blowing just enough warmth to keep the windshield clear without fogging the glass. Beside him, his wife Emily cradled a styrofoam cup of coffee she'd picked up at the last gas station 2 hours back. In the back seat, their daughter Lily, 11 years old, leaned against her pillow, her headphones slipping slightly off one ear as she dozed to some pop song pulsing faintly from her phone. The cab of the SUV smelled faintly of French fries and coffee, mingled with the cold leather that never seemed to lose its chill during winters in Alaska. Daniel liked to keep the radio low, some local station fuzzing between classic rock and static, just enough background noise to soften the silence of endless snow. Outside, the headlights pushed a yellow cone across the whitewashed world. Snowbanks, taller than the hood, skeletal birches stripped bare, and a sky so black it seemed endless. It was nearing midnight, though it was hard to tell. Time blurred when the road offered no landmarks. He flexed his fingers against the wheel, his joints sore from hours of driving. They were making the long push to Anchorage to spend the holidays with Emily's sister, a tradition that was equal parts obligation and comfort. He pictured arriving tomorrow, Lily running in to hug her cousins, the kitchen warm with the smell of cinnamon rolls, adults clinking mugs of spiced cider. The thought made him smile softly to himself. These long, lonely drives always led him to fantasize about arrival, the relief of light and noise and warmth after so much silence. The road stretched out ahead, a ribbon of dark glass slicing through the snow. Snowflakes drifted lazily across the beams, each one a fleeting spark before vanishing against the windshield. Daniel's eyes scanned for movement, moose, deer, the occasional fox, but mostly it was just road, just snow, just nothing. Still, something about tonight carried an undercurrent he couldn't name. The silence felt heavier than usual, as if the night pressed against the car with unseen weight. Even the radio seemed subdued, as though the air itself wanted quiet. He told himself it was just the fatigue, the isolation of this particular stretch of highway where few cars ever passed. Yet a small unease stirred, like the whisper of a draft you can't find the source of. Lily stirred in the back seat and pushed her headphones down to her neck. "How much longer?" she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. "Couple more hours, kiddo," Daniel said gently. "Try to rest." She yawned, pulling her blanket up over her chin, then glanced out the window with half-lidded eyes. Her gaze lingered, then sharpened. "There's someone out there." Daniel frowned. He followed her line of sight, squinting through the blur of snow and night. At first he thought it was just a post or a shadow, but as the SUV drew closer, the shape took form. A figure stood at the edge of the highway, a young woman bundled in a parka, hood fur framing her pale face. She hugged herself against the cold, her body shivering visibly in the headlights. "Jesus," Emily muttered, straightening in her seat. "She'll freeze to death out here." Daniel's instinct was immediate. He slowed, hazard lights clicking in the stillness. He pulled to the shoulder, tires crunching against the icy gravel. The woman looked up, startled, as though unsure whether to approach. Daniel rolled the window down a crack, breath puffing into the night. "You okay?" he called. The young woman nodded quickly, her breath clouding around her lips. Thank you," she stammered, her voice trembling as much from cold as fear. "Please, just for a bit of warmth." Emily leaned over. "Of course. Get in. We'll take you somewhere safe." The woman climbed in carefully, closing the door with a soft click. A rush of frigid air followed her, and Emily shivered. The hitchhiker pulled her hood tighter, eyes downcast, hands rubbing against her sleeves as if trying to chase away a deep cold. "You're lucky we saw you," Daniel said, merging back onto the highway. "It's brutal out there. Where are you headed?" The young woman's voice was faint, nearly lost under the tire's drone. "South, just south." Daniel glanced at her in the rearview mirror, meaning to offer reassurance, but froze. The back seat was empty. Lily sat huddled against the window, staring wide-eyed at nothing. Only the impression of frost lingered on the upholstery, a crystalline outline where a body should have been. He blinked hard, his pulse quickening. For a fleeting second, he told himself fatigue was playing tricks. He looked again. Empty. No one there. And yet the air carried a sharp chill that hadn't been there before. Emily hadn't noticed. She turned, her face soft with concern. Us be frozen," she said into the void. "Here, take my blanket." Daniel's throat tightened. He opened his mouth to warn her, to say something, anything, but stopped when he heard it. The sound of shallow, raspy breathing, not Lily's, not Emily's. It came from the empty seat, cold and steady, as if lungs of ice were drawing air. Lily whispered, barely audible, "She's still here, Daddy. She's sitting right next to me." Daniel gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles pale. His eyes darted between the rearview mirror and the stretch of endless road, his mind fighting the impossibility of what he knew was true. The SUV rolled forward into the night, carrying 4 souls when only 3 should have been inside. The atmosphere thickened with each passing mile. The heater no longer kept the cold at bay. Instead, it felt like the frost had seeped in through, unseen cracks curling around their ankles, pressing into their chests. Emily pulled her coat tighter, her brow furrowing. "Why is it so cold all of a sudden?" Daniel didn't answer. His jaw clenched, his heart hammering against his ribs. The breathing persisted, soft but deliberate, like a whisper in rhythm with the road. At the edge of his vision, the frost on the back window spread in delicate veins, spiderwebbing outward as though a frozen hand pressed from the other side. Lily huddled against her pillow, whispering again, "She's looking at me." "Stop," Daniel said sharply, his voice cracking more from fear than anger. "It's just your imagination, sweetheart." But the conviction wasn't there, and he knew Lily could hear the tremor in his words. The radio sputtered suddenly, breaking the silence with a burst of static. The music warped, voices bending unnaturally low, then shrieking high, before dissolving back into hiss. Emily reached out, fumbling to adjust the dial, but every frequency was the same. Static, distorted voices like fragments of conversations cut apart and sewn together wrong. Amid the noise, Daniel swore he heard a phrase, faint but unmistakable. "Let me out." The headlights flickered, just once but enough to make his breath hitch. He pressed the accelerator harder, desperate for distance, for speed, for anything that might pull them from this suffocating presence. The road seemed endless, now repeating itself in loops of identical trees and snowbanks. He began to wonder if they had passed the same bent birch 3 times already. Paranoia gnawed at him, the feeling of being trapped in some frozen labyrinth. Emily's hand found his arm. "Dan," she whispered, fear now evident in her eyes. "What's happening?" Before he could answer, a shape appeared on the road ahead, another figure standing dead center in their lane. The same young woman in the parka, face pale, eyes dark hollows, hair stiff with frost. She didn't move as the SUV barreled toward her, Daniel swerved violently, tires shrieking against the ice. The SUV fishtailed. Emily screamed. Lily cried. Out and for a moment time fractured into a kaleidoscope of headlights, snow, and sheer panic. Somehow he wrestled the vehicle back under control, heart hammering, breath ragged. When he glanced back, the road behind them was empty. Nothing. No figure, only swirling snow. The breathing, however, grew louder, ragged, urgent, as though whatever they had nearly struck had climbed inside. Emily's teeth chattered. She pulled Lily close, wrapping her arms protectively. Lily pressed her face into her mother's chest, sobbing quietly. Yet through her tears she whispered again, "She's still here, right next to me. She won't leave." Daniel's vision blurred with a sheen of sweat despite the cold. His grip on the wheel ached. Every shadow along the roadside seemed to twitch. Every gust of snow felt like a hand reaching. He couldn't shake the certainty that if he looked too long into the back seat, he would see her, sitting upright, frost dripping from her hair, breathing slow and steady. The SUV surged forward, mile after mile, through a world that felt more dream than real. The road, the trees, even the snow seemed to close in around them, suffocating in their sameness. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, faint lights shimmered on the horizon. A truck stop, glowing faintly through the storm. Daniel nearly sobbed with relief. He pulled into the lot, tires crunching hard on the packed snow. He killed the engine, silence rushing in like a vacuum. For a long moment, no one moved. The cold seemed to lift slightly, though the frost on the back seat remained, glistening faintly under the dim parking lot lights. The breathing had stopped, replaced by the ringing silence of exhaustion and fear. Daniel turned slowly in his seat, half dreading what he might see. The back seat held only Lily, clutching her pillow, eyes wide with lingering terror. The space beside her was empty, nothing but the faint outline of frost. Emily exhaled shakily, rubbing her arms. "She's gone," she whispered. "Thank God." Lily's small voice broke the silence. "No," she said softly. "She just left the car. She's waiting outside." Daniel's eyes darted to the fogged glass of the rear window. For a second, he swore he saw the shape of a handprint, pressed faintly into the frost before it melted away. They didn't linger. They stayed only long enough to gather themselves, then drove again, this time in silence. No radio, no conversation. Each of them caught in the gnawing awareness that something unnatural had shared their journey. In the years that followed, Daniel never spoke of it openly, though he thought of it often, especially on long drives at night. Sometimes in the dead of winter, when the heater sputtered and the air turned unnaturally cold, he would glance into the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a pale face framed by fur, watching him from the shadows. And every so often, Lily would wake from a dream, swearing she could still hear that breath beside her, steady, icy, and waiting. The snow had been falling steadily for hours, flattening the world into a monochrome of gray sky and blinding white earth. Thomas Grady leaned forward over the wheel of his rig, the low hum of the engine, a steady companion against the silence pressing in from the Alaskan wilderness. His headlights carved narrow tunnels through the sheets of snow, catching the whirling flakes as they hurled themselves across the road like desperate moths. He shifted in his seat, stretching out his stiff shoulders. The thermos of black coffee on the dashboard steamed faintly, and he reached for it with one gloved hand, careful not to let the wheel stray. A sip burned his tongue, but the warmth felt like salvation. The road stretched endlessly in front of him, a frozen ribbon cutting through forests heavy with ice. On the passenger seat, a crumpled photo sat wedged under a logbook. His daughter, 7 years old, tooth missing, grinning under the sun at a summer fair. It grounded him, reminded him of the reason he drove these exhausting routes. Money saved, bills paid, the promise of a better school for her. The job was lonely, but it was steady. The CB radio crackled with faint static, the kind of background noise truckers grew numb to. Every now and then a voice would pipe up, someone 30 miles away talking about weather conditions or warnings about black ice. or the casual small talk of men and women who lived their lives on the road. Tonight, though, the channels had been mostly dead. Even truckers didn't like running this stretch of Route 89 in weather like this. Thomas cleared his throat, humming along faintly to the tune bleeding from his cassette deck. Classic rock, muffled by age but comforting. He tried not to think about how far the next gas station was, or how long until he'd see another soul. Nights like this could swallow a man whole if he let them. The snow deepened as the minutes stretched on. His wipers squealed against the windshield. Trees leaned in close on either side of the road, their branches burdened with ice. Somewhere far beyond them lay miles of untouched forest, empty except for wolves and the occasional cabin where hunters holed up for the season. Thomas kept his eyes forward, his rig's headlights like two small suns fighting against the dark. He told himself everything was fine. Just another night. Just another haul. Nothing strange here. But then, through the hissing static of the CB, a voice pushed its way into the cab. It was faint at first, broken like it was fighting through storm interference. "Don't stop." Thomas frowned and reached for the receiver, twisting the dial to sharpen the channel. The static wavered, then solidified into words. A man's voice, harsh and urgent. "Don't stop at mile marker 77. Then silence. Thomas blinked, leaned closer, waiting for a follow-up. But the channel dissolved back into empty noise. He keyed the mic. "Breaker, you got a copy?" His voice was steady but tinged with unease. "Say again. What's that about?" "Mile 77. Nothing. Just snowstorm static." He set the mic down slowly, brow furrowing. That was odd. Usually truckers were clearer than that, and if it had been interference, it wouldn't have come through so cleanly. The voice had been sharp, like the man was sitting right there in the passenger seat whispering across the static. Thomas shook his head. Storm weather, he told himself. Sometimes the radio did strange things, bounced signals from 100 miles away. Still, the message clung to him. "Don't stop at mile marker 77. He flexed his hands on the wheel, eyes darting to the roadside where snowdrifts climbed higher. The road markers were barely visible through the blowing white, but he knew one thing. They were getting closer. Mile 77 wasn't far. The storm thickened, snowflakes slamming against the windshield like tiny bullets. He leaned forward, squinting, his shoulders tightening. The world outside his cab looked unreal, dreamlike. The forest a blur of white ghosts. The road disappearing under a blanket of shifting snow. Somewhere in that shifting veil, he thought he saw movement. A figure, maybe, standing near the trees. He blinked, rubbed his eyes. Nothing there. His CB hissed faintly again. But no words followed. The silence felt heavier now. Oppressive, pressing against the cab of his truck like a living thing. Then he saw it. The road marker loomed ahead, half buried in snow. 77. And just beyond it, in the cut of his headlights, something emerged from the storm. It was another rig, or what was left of one. The semi was canted into the ditch, its cab door hanging open, swinging slowly on frozen hinges. Snow had swallowed its wheels, crusted its windows. The trailer sagged like a dead animal under the weight of ice. Thomas's chest tightened. He slowed instinctively, rubber hissing on snow-packed pavement. The sight of another wreck on this desolate road pulled at him. Truckers always stopped for each other. It was a rule, a kind of brotherhood born of long nights and endless miles. But the voice echoed in his mind. "Don't stop." He crept past the wreck, his headlights washing over its ruined frame. The strangest thing was its condition. It didn't look like an accident from tonight, or even this season. The metal was rusted, the paint stripped by years of storms. It looked abandoned, ancient, left to rot in the cold. And yet, as his truck rolled past, he heard it. A cough. Weak. Wet. Coming from inside the frozen cab. Thomas's breath caught in his throat. His foot slammed the brake, the trailer fishtailing slightly before steadying. His hands gripped the wheel so hard his knuckles whitened. The cough came again. Someone was inside. The rules of the road screamed at him to stop, to check, to help. But the warning gnawed at him, louder now than the wind outside. Don't stop, at mile marker 77. For a moment he just sat there, caught between the weight of human instinct and a terror he couldn't name. His headlights illuminated the ruined truck, the cab door creaking open and shut like a mouth whispering secrets. Snow poured in, covering the seat. The coughing sound rasped again, faint but undeniable. Against his better judgment, Thomas shifted into park. His boots hit the frozen ground, sinking into snow that clung to his jeans. The wind cut through him like knives, and he hunched his shoulders, pulling his jacket tighter. His flashlight beam swung toward the wreck. The closer he got, the stranger it looked. The cab's interior was sheathed in ice, the windshield frosted opaque. Rust bloomed along the edges like blackened veins. It looked impossible that anyone could still be alive inside. He climbed the snowy bank, boots crunching, and grabbed the frozen door. The metal burned against his glove as he hauled it wider. His flashlight swept across the cab. Empty. The seats were shredded with age, the dashboard warped and cracked. A layer of ice coated everything in sight. No footprints disturbed the snow that had drifted across the floor. Then, from the darkness, came a whisper. Too late. The beam of his flashlight stuttered as his hand trembled. The voice hadn't come through the radio this time. It had been right beside him, warm against his ear despite the freezing air. He spun around, breath fogging in the beam of his light. Nothing but the swirling snow. The forest loomed, black trunks twisting into the storm. His heart hammered, every instinct screaming at him to get back to his truck. He stumbled down the slope, boots sliding on the ice, and flung himself back into his cab. The door slammed, sealing him in with his racing pulse. His headlights carved into the storm again, catching only white emptiness. The CB crackled to life. 77, the voice rasped, guttural now, almost inhuman. 77. Thomas jammed the truck into gear and floored the accelerator, his rig roaring forward through the snow. The wreck slipped into the storm behind him, swallowed whole. But the voice followed. Through the static, through the roar of his engine, it whispered, it muttered, it coughed. Sometimes it was beside him. Sometimes it was in the sleeper cab behind him. Sometimes it was inside his own skull. He drove blindly, mile after mile, eyes burning, throat dry. The storm never lifted. Every mile marker blurred past, and every one he passed felt like it might be the last. When at last the storm thinned, when he staggered into the neon glow of a roadside gas station, he was shaking so badly he could barely hold the wheel. He told no one what he had seen. He couldn't. Who would believe him? A phantom wreck, a ghost cough, a warning that had come too late. And yet, when he stumbled inside to pay for gas and warmth, his eyes fell on the community bulletin board by the counter. Faded photos were pinned there, lost dogs, yard sale flyers, memorials. One, nearly yellow with age, showed a smiling man in front of a semi. The headline above it read, "Local trucker lost in blizzard, 1977. Thomas stared at it, blood turning cold. The face was familiar, the jawline, the eyes. It was the man he'd thought he'd heard coughing in the cab. And taped beneath the photo, someone had scrawled in shaky handwriting, almost erased by time. Don't stop at mile marker 77, the wheel. Wind howled against the glass outside, and somewhere in the static of his idling CB radio, Thomas swore he heard someone breathing. A thin veil of snow streaked across the windshield, catching in the sweep of the wipers before vanishing into the night. The road stretched endlessly, a black ribbon vanishing into the storm, flanked by towering pines whose branches sagged beneath the heavy weight of ice. Sam Carter leaned forward, his hands gripping the wheel tightly as though sheer willpower alone could hold his battered Ford Ranger steady against the wind. He had been driving for hours, and every mile felt heavier than the last. The heater coughed, weak warmth into the cab, fogging the windows in patches. His thermos sat in the cup holder, the bitter dregs of coffee long gone. He reached over to tap the radio, hoping for some static to fade into music, but only a hollow hiss filled the silence. No stations out here, nothing but the sound of the engine and the steady whine of the wind pushing at the truck's frame. Alaska was cruel in winter. Sam had known that when he took this route. He'd grown up on stories about men freezing to death only a dozen miles from their destination. But the job had to be done, and there was a family waiting for him back in Anchorage. He thought of Claire, her messages full of worry when she heard about the storm. He thought of his daughter, Beth, who had left a voice note earlier, her small voice asking if Daddy was bringing back the moose keychain he'd promised. He smiled despite the gnawing fatigue and the creeping awareness that the highway had grown emptier, darker. He leaned back, adjusting his stiff shoulders, and tried to distract himself. The faint rattle in the back seat reminded him of the toolbox, sliding with each curve, a familiar sound that oddly comforted him. He sipped at the air where coffee should have been and muttered, "Almost there. Just a few more hours." The snow thickened. Headlights fought desperately against it, painting ghostly beams across the frozen pines. Each tree seemed closer than it should be, bending toward the road as if to listen. Sam slowed, hands tightening again. The road was slicker now, black ice glimmering faintly under the passing lights. He could feel the tires searching for grip. The storm muffled everything. No distant hum of other engines, no crackle of radio chatter, just the relentless shuffle of snow on steel, and the slow crawl of his own breath fogging in the cab. He tried, rolling down the window for a gulp of cold air, but the gust that slammed inside stung like needles. He quickly shut it again. There was something strange in the air. Not just the storm, it felt heavier, denser, as though the world around him had tightened. Even the shadows looked different. At times he thought he saw a flicker of orange between the trees, but when he turned his head it was gone, only black branches waving in the gale. He shook it off. Fatigue, that's all. He'd been awake for nearly 20 hours fighting the road and the storm. Hallucinations weren't unheard of. Still, the feeling persisted. Something waited in the woods, something watched. Then it came, the sound. A dull thump, like someone had struck the bed of his truck from the outside. Sam stiffened, heart slamming against his ribs. He glanced into the mirrors, but the swirling snow swallowed everything. He eased his foot on the gas, listening, waiting. For a long moment, nothing but the sigh of the storm. Then, another thump. Louder. Closer. His mind clawed for reason. Ice sliding loose. Maybe a fallen branch striking as he passed. He wanted to believe it, but unease prickled the base of his neck. He turned the volume dial on the radio again, desperate for distraction. For a fraction of a second, he thought he heard voices in the static, murmurs too quick to catch before the hiss returned. "Jesus," he muttered, wiping sweat from his temple though the cab was freezing. And then, between the blur of trees, he saw it. A light, faint, golden, warm, unnatural in this world of white and black. He slowed instinctively, leaning toward the windshield. There it was again, deeper in the forest. A cabin, he thought, or maybe a ranger's station. The glow of firelight flickered through windows framed in frost. Relief surged through him. He hadn't seen another human being in hours. Shelter, maybe even a phone. At the very least, a chance to step out of the damn truck and warm his bones. Without questioning further, Sam turned onto a narrow path that cut away from the highway, tires crunching deep into unplowed snow. The cabin was smaller than he expected, but alive with the glow of comfort. A curl of smoke drifted from the chimney, dissolving into the storm. Golden squares of window broke through the dark. He parked crookedly in front, headlights sweeping across a porch coated in fresh powder. No footprints, no tire tracks. Still, the firelight beckoned. He climbed out, the cold slashing at his face. Snow clung instantly to his jacket. He hurried up the creaking steps, boots thudding heavily on the wood. "Hello?" he called, knocking firmly. His voice sounded too loud in the storm. The door creaked inward on its own, slow as if pushed by an unseen hand. A wave of heat brushed his face. The smell of burning pine seeped into the night air. Sam froze. No movement inside, no answer to his call, just silence, broken only by the snap of a fireplace somewhere deeper in the room. Anyone here? He tried again. He hesitated only a moment before stepping in. Warmth enveloped him. His shoulders slumped in sudden relief. The cabin was quaint, almost picturesque, wooden walls glowing with the fire's light, shadows dancing across the floor. A table sat near the hearth, set neatly for dinner. 2 bowls of stew steamed as though they had been placed only moments ago. Sam's stomach growled. He hadn't eaten since the gas station 8 hours back. The rich smell, beef, onions, herbs, was overwhelming. He moved closer, the floorboards creaking under his boots. But unease wormed its way through him. The bowls steamed, yes, but the chairs were empty. The silence oppressive. He glanced around. The cabin was small, a single room, a staircase leading to a dark loft. No signs of people, no coats on hooks, no boots by the door. He turned back to the table. The bowls were no longer steaming. Sam blinked, leaning closer. The stew sat thick and congealed, gray with cold. He had only looked away for seconds. A sound creaked above, the groan of a footstep in the loft. Sam froze, every muscle locking. His breath clouded in the air, though moments ago. The room had been warm. Slowly, painfully, he lifted his eyes to the dark above the stairs. Nothing moved. Shadows shifted only by the fire's light. Hello? His voice cracked. Silence. Then, another creak, closer this time. Panic crawled through his chest. He stepped backward toward the door, eyes fixed on the loft. The bowls of stew had vanished. The table sat bare, wood-scarred and empty. Sam's heart raced. He fumbled for the knob, pulled. The door resisted for a breath too long before jerking open with a moan. Cold storm air rushed in. He stumbled out onto the porch. Behind him, the fire guttered with a sudden hiss. He turned, half expecting to see the glow spill through the windows. But there was no light. The cabin was gone. Sam stood knee-deep in snow where the porch had been, staring into an empty clearing. No smoke, no walls, no table. Only the hiss of the storm pressing down on endless trees. He gasped, spinning in a slow circle, desperate for bearings. The path he had driven no longer existed, only unbroken snow. His truck sat alone in the clearing, headlights cutting across empty drifts. His pulse hammered in his ears. He staggered toward the Ranger, boots sinking deep. The wind howled louder, now screaming through the branches. He climbed into the cab, slamming the door shut, chest heaving. His breath poured out in frantic bursts. For a moment he sat there, gripping the wheel, trying to steady himself. Maybe fatigue had finally cracked, and maybe the storm was playing tricks. He started the engine, the low rumble grounding him. In the mirror, something moved. A shadow leaned against the back seat just behind his shoulder. Sam whipped around. Nothing, only the rattle of his toolbox. His hands shook violently as he faced forward again, refusing to look at the mirror. He pressed the accelerator, tires spinning before catching traction. The truck lurched forward. The headlights swept across the trees and caught the cabin again. Standing whole, smoke curling from its chimney, windows glowing with that same golden warmth. He screamed, slamming the wheel, refusing to stop. The road, or what he prayed was the road, opened ahead. The cabin fell away behind him, swallowed by snow. His knuckles blanched on the wheel as he drove blind through the storm. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed in a blur of white and black. He couldn't tell anymore. His mind replayed the bowls of stew, the footstep above, the sudden cold. When the storm eased and dawn bled pale across the horizon, Sam found himself pulling into a gas station on the edge of town. The attendant gave him a curious look as he staggered out, face ashen, eyes hollow. "You all right, buddy? Storm catch you bad?" Sam opened his mouth, but no words came. Later, when he finally found the courage to speak, he tried to explain. He described the cabin, the warmth, the fire, the vanishing. The attendant's smile faltered. He shook his head slowly. "There ain't no cabin out that way. Not for miles, not for years." Sam never took that road again. But sometimes late at night when snow whispers against his window, he swears he sees a glow deep in the trees. A golden light, flickering, waiting, and he knows if he looks too long it will be there again. The cabin that wasn't. The windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm against the falling snow, their squeaks the only sound besides the low hum of the engine. David Reese leaned forward, eyes narrowed, squinting past the streaks of white flurries swirling under his headlights. It was nearly midnight on the Dalton Highway, the long strip of road that clawed its way north through Alaska's frozen wilderness, and he still had 100 miles to go before he could stop for the night. His thermos sat wedged between the dashboard and the defroster vent, the lid half unscrewed, releasing faint curls of steam that fogged the glass. A cassette player wedged into the dash clicked as the tape inside switched sides, and the faint notes of Johnny Cash drifted through the cab, low and gravelly, a song about lonesome roads and midnight riders. The heater rattled, struggling against the creeping cold that seeped through the seams of the old Kenworth truck. David rubbed his gloved hands together and flexed his shoulders, trying to fight the stiffness of 12 hours on the road. His breath still came visible when he exhaled. Out here, the air never seemed to warm no matter how high the dial turned. He passed no cars, no headlights in the opposite lane, no distant glow of towns or villages. Just an endless ribbon of black ice under wheels, a canyon of snowbanks piled high on either side, and above him the northern sky, low, swollen clouds, pregnant with more snow dimly lit by a weak moon. He thought of his wife back in Fairbanks, already asleep with the dog curled at her feet, probably worrying he hadn't called. The CB radio hissed on the passenger seat, silent tonight, no chatter from other drivers. He was alone, but that was normal out here. David took a sip of the lukewarm coffee and tapped the wheel to the rhythm of the song. It was an ordinary haul, the same road he had driven 100 times. Tires crunching snow, the occasional gust rocking the cab, the white landscape stretching on forever. Normal, predictable, safe, and yet something itched at the back of his mind. Maybe it was the silence. The highway was never this quiet. No growl of distant plows, no crackle of truckers swapping weather reports, not even the distant echo of wolves. Just the hiss of his tires on slick asphalt and the whisper of wind brushing across the windshield. It pressed against him, a kind of silence that wasn't peaceful, but watchful. His knuckles tightened on the wheel. The bridge came into view without warning. A narrow stretch of steel girders arched across a frozen river, its skeletal frame rimed with frost, the road narrowed to one lane. He slowed, the tires crunching louder, headlights slicing through the veil of snow. The metal beams rose, like the ribs of some long-dead beast black against the dim night. David eased the truck toward the entrance, eyes sweeping left and right out of habit, checking for ice patches. That was when he saw it. At first he thought it was a trick of shadow. A tall figure stood dead center of the bridge, unmoving, its shape just barely defined in the yellow wash of headlights. Too tall, too narrow, limbs long, hanging low, no reflective clothing, no signal flare, just a body, human or almost human, frozen in place as though it had been waiting for him. David's foot slammed the brake pedal. Tires squealed against the icy road, the truck juddering as it fought to stop. The thermos rattled, spilling, coffee across the dashboard. His heart hammered in his chest, eyes locked on the figure ahead. The headlights flickered once, dimmed, then cut out entirely. Darkness swallowed everything. For a few long seconds, only the sound of the wind filled the cab. The bridge, the river, the figure, gone in the blackness. David cursed under his breath, slapping the dash, twisting the headlight switch. His pulse pounded in his ears. Then with a low hum, the lights flickered back to life. The bridge was empty. No figure, no shadow, just steel girders and snow blowing across the planks. His chest rose and fell hard. Maybe he'd imagined it. Maybe fatigue was playing tricks on him. But he knew what he had seen, something standing there, watching. He swallowed, shifted gears, and eased the truck forward onto the bridge. The beams groaned overhead. The tires slipped on slick ice. He kept his eyes fixed on the far end, urging the truck across. The silence inside the cab broken only by the rasp of his breath. A flicker caught his eye. In the rearview mirror, the bridge stretched behind him in a tunnel of steel and snow, and there, pacing silently along the center line, was the figure. It followed him on foot, long strides unnaturally fast, its shape warped by the trembling glass. Its head seemed too close to the ceiling of the bridge, shoulders sloped, arms dangling low. It didn't run. It didn't hurry. It just kept pace, each step echoing against the steel beams in sync with his own heartbeat. David's stomach dropped. He pressed harder on the accelerator, the engine roaring as the truck surged forward, tires spitting snow. His eyes flicked from windshield to mirror, back and forth, unable to look away. The figure never slowed. It just kept coming, gaining no ground, losing none, as though tethered to him. By the time he burst off the far end of the bridge, his hands were slick with sweat inside his gloves. He drove blind for 100 yards before daring to glance back. The bridge lay empty in the mirror. No figure, no shadow, just steel fading into storm. He tried to breathe, tried to tell himself it was fatigue, stress, some trick of the lights. But every nerve in his body screamed otherwise. He knew deep down something had been there, and it had seen him. The road stretched ahead, white lines vanishing into darkness. Snow thickened, swirling harder, drumming against the windshield. He turned the radio dial, desperate for sound, but all he found was static. Low, guttural, distorted, as though voices whispered just below hearing. He drove faster. He didn't dare look in the mirror again. But every so often, in the corner of his vision, he thought he saw a shadow move against the snow, keeping pace just beyond the reach of his headlights. The storm grew worse as the night pressed on. Snow blew sideways across the road, blinding in the beams, forcing him to slow even when his instincts screamed to flee. The wipers smeared ice into streaks, the heater barely keeping frost from creeping across the glass. His body ached with tension, every muscle coiled tight. The silence became unbearable. He thought of calling on the CB, but what would he say? "Something's following me?" The radio hissed on the seat like it already knew. Then came the noise. At first faint, a low thump against the frame of the truck. Then again, louder, closer, like knuckles dragging along the steel trailer. He flinched, glancing to the side, but nothing showed through the window but snow. Another scrape, this one high along the roof, traveling slowly from front to back. His skin crawled. He gripped the wheel until his hands cramped. The thumping came again, heavier, like footsteps, pacing atop the cab. Snow sifted down past the windshield as though something dislodged it. The truck swayed under the weight of something shifting above him. He wanted to stop, to throw open the door and shine his flashlight upward, but he couldn't move. If he stopped, it would be waiting. The next sound came from the mirror, a reflection, faint but unmistakable. The tall figure perched on the trailer roof, crouched low, its arms dangling, head cocked toward the cab. Its face was a blur, but the eyes, black pits glowing faint with reflection, locked with his. David shouted and floored the gas. The truck fishtailed on ice, the trailer lurching behind him, the engine straining. The figure held its place, crawling forward inch by inch, hand over hand toward the cab, toward the Yora. Each movement rattled the frame. Snow blinded him, the road vanishing, and still the figure closed in. He swerved, desperate, the truck nearly tipping on a curve, tires screeching. The reflection in the mirror showed it almost at the windshield. Now its long arm reaching down, and then the mirror cracked. A fine line split across the glass, spidering outward, the image distorting into shards of black. David cried out, jerking the wheel, nearly sending the truck into a snowbank. When he steadied, breath ragged, the roof was empty again. But the crack in the mirror remained. He drove on, minutes stretching like hours, until the storm began to thin, the snow easing, the clouds breaking to reveal a pale wash of moon. He slowed, his body trembling, exhaustion pulling at him. The road was empty again, Nothing followed. Nothing moved. He told himself he'd imagined it. Stress, fatigue, snow blindness. He wanted to believe it. But then in the fractured rearview mirror, he caught one last glimpse. A tall shadow stood in the road far behind him, just beyond the bridge, motionless in the moonlight, watching. He blinked, and it was gone. David Reese never drove that road again. Some say the Dalton is haunted by old accidents, drivers lost to ice and storms. Some say a figure walks the bridges, waiting for headlights to catch it. He never spoke of it, not even to his wife. But on winter nights, when the snow drifts high and the silence grows heavy, some truckers swear they've seen a long shadow pacing just behind their trailers, keeping perfect stride, step for step, until the bridge comes into view, and no one ever dares look too long in the mirror. The road had been empty for nearly an hour, and the only sound that kept her tethered to wakefulness was the low hum of her Subaru's engine and the occasional whistle of the wind as it pressed against the car's body. Danielle tightened her grip on the wheel, her knuckles pale beneath the dashboard's soft green glow. She wasn't supposed to be out this late. She wasn't supposed to be anywhere near this remote stretch of Alaskan road, not with the forecast threatening snow by morning. But life didn't care about forecasts, and her mother's sudden call earlier that afternoon, the one saying that her father's health had worsened, had sent her into motion before she could think twice. She had packed a small overnight bag, grabbed a thermos of coffee, and told herself she'd drive through the night until she reached Anchorage. Now, with the clock on the dashboard blinking past midnight, her body longed for rest. She fought it with sips from her thermos and the faint crackle of a local radio station, though the announcer's voice had long since dissolved into a storm of static, leaving only the thin melody of some forgotten country song. The road stretched endlessly before her, two pale yellow beams carving tunnels through the white. Pines stood at attention on either side, black silhouettes sharpened against snow, their upper branches groaning softly in the wind. She rolled her shoulders, feeling the stiffness settle in. A part of her wanted to pull over just for an hour's nap, but she knew how dangerous that could be out here. The temperatures dropped cruelly quick, and so she pressed on, her eyes watering from exhaustion, until a small glow appeared ahead, a lone gas station standing out like an ember in the otherwise unbroken dark. Relief pricked through her chest. She hadn't seen a single service stop for miles, and the needle of her gas gauge had just slipped closer to the red. The station's fluorescent lights hummed weakly above the pumps, throwing a pale halo across the snow. An old rectangular building stood behind them, its windows lit, the glass fogged slightly from warmth inside. Danielle eased into the lot, tires crunching, and parked beside the nearest pump. For a moment she simply sat there, staring at the glow, letting herself breathe. Civilization, a human face maybe, that was all she wanted, something to break the solitude of the night. She pulled on her coat, stuffed her wallet into her pocket, and stepped out into the cold. The wind nipped at her ears, sharp and immediate, while the pump beside her seemed oddly antiquated, its numbers mechanical rather than digital, the kind she hadn't seen in decades. She brushed off the unease, slid her card through the slot, and began to fill the tank. The world was silent except for the sluggish tick of the pump. Her own reflection peered faintly back at her from the car's side window. Pale face, tired eyes, strands of hair stuck to her cheeks from the damp cold. She wanted to be anywhere but here. When the pump clicked full, she replaced the nozzle and made her way toward the station's glass door. A bell jingled as she pushed it open, and a warmth enveloped her immediately. Inside, it looked like any other rural gas station. Shelves of canned goods, racks of chips, a humming soda fridge at the back. But her eyes were drawn quickly to the counter, where the attendant stood. He was tall, too tall for the cramped space, and he didn't move when she entered. His eyes, pale, almost glassy, fixed on her without blinking, as though he'd been waiting. His skin, under the buzzing, fluorescent bulbs had a sheen to it, waxy like candle drippings cooled into place. His lips were stretched in something that almost resembled a smile, but not quite. Danielle offered a polite nod, pulling her coat tighter. "Just need to pay for pump 2, she said, her voice small in the stagnant air. The man didn't speak. His hand lifted, slow, deliberate, and hovered toward the register. She caught the faintest squeak of his joints as he moved, like stiff hinges straining against rust. Finally, a receipt slipped from the machine, curling slightly in his hand. Danielle stepped forward, reaching for it, trying not to stare. The air smelled faintly sweet, like old plastic left too close to a heater. Her fingers brushed his as she took the slip, and she suppressed a shiver. His skin was colder than the air outside. She glanced at the receipt automatically. Her stomach tightened. Date: July 17th, 1973. The numbers burned into her mind. She blinked, looked again, but they hadn't changed. For a long second she couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Her pulse began to pound in her ears. The man's glassy eyes never left hers. Danielle muttered a thank you, shoved the receipt into her pocket, and turned quickly for the door. The bell jingled again as she stepped out into the night. She didn't dare look back until she'd reached her car. When she finally did, she froze. The lights were gone. The entire station, the glowing pumps, the lit windows, the attendants, still figure, was gone. Only darkness stood where it had been, deep and endless, as though it had never existed at all. Her breath hitched in her throat. The snow stretched untouched across the lot, her car sitting alone in the empty whiteness. The road beyond was waiting. Danielle scrambled into the driver's seat, hands shaking as she jammed the key into the ignition. The headlights flared to life, cutting through the dark, and she pressed her foot to the gas. The tires spun, caught, and the Subaru lurched forward, back onto the road, away from the nothingness that had just swallowed the station whole. But her hands trembled too hard to keep the wheel steady. Her breath came in sharp bursts. She glanced at the receipt still clutched in her hand and nearly tossed it out the window. But some instinct made her shove it back into her pocket instead. It felt heavy there, far heavier than a slip of paper should. The road unspooled endlessly, her headlights bouncing against the snow. The trees loomed higher, their shadows twitching across the hood. Every so often she thought she saw movement between them, a figure darting, a pale flicker that vanished when she looked directly. The radio sputtered again, a sharp burst of static, then silence. She told herself she was imagining it, just nerves, exhaustion. But she couldn't shake the image of the man's unblinking stare, of the waxy sheen of his skin, of the year printed in neat black ink on that impossible receipt. As the miles passed, the dread deepened. The trees seemed denser now. The road, narrower, as if the forest itself was pressing closer, trying to smother the thin strip of asphalt. Her high beams caught a shape at the roadside, a figure, tall, still. She slammed the brakes, heart hammering, but when she looked again, there was nothing there. Her breathing grew ragged. She forced the car forward, white-knuckled on the wheel, but now the reflection in her rearview mirror seemed wrong. She couldn't place it at first, not until she dared glance directly. The back seat wasn't empty. For the briefest moment she saw him, the attendant, sitting motionless behind her, waxy skin glowing faintly in the dim light, eyes unblinking in the glass. She screamed, jerking the wheel, the Subaru swerving violently across the icy road. Tires screeched, the car fishtailed, but she managed to straighten it before it spun. The mirror was empty again. Her chest heaved. Tears pricked her eyes. The receipt in her pocket seemed to burn. The road carried her on, mile after mile, and though she never saw the attendant again, the feeling never left. The feeling of his gaze fixed firmly on her, just out of sight. The certainty that at any moment she might glance at the mirror and find him waiting. When she finally reached Anchorage at dawn, the streets empty and blue in the morning light, she pulled into her mother's driveway and killed the engine. She sat there for a long time, trembling before forcing herself to move. Her mother opened the door, relief flooding her features, pulling Danielle into a hug. But Danielle's hand slipped into her pocket, fingers brushing the crumpled paper. There. She pulled it free. The date still read July 17, 1973, and beneath it faintly, words she hadn't noticed before. Thank you. Come again. The paper fluttered in the cold morning breeze, but no matter how many times she read the words, they didn't fade. She never told her mother what had happened. Never told anyone. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the house was still, she swore she could hear the faint squeak of stiff joints moving down the hall, and when she turned on the kitchen light, the bulb would flicker, as though someone was standing just beyond its glow, waiting. The snow had been falling for hours. Thick flakes illuminated in the beam of Jack Morley's headlights as his 18-wheeler growled through the endless dark. The cab was warm, the heater humming steadily, though he could still see faint clouds of his own breath when he leaned toward the cracked side window. A thermos of coffee sat between the seats, its metallic surface rattling gently each time the truck hit a stretch of uneven ice. On the radio, a late-night station whispered through, static. Some country singer crooning about home and loneliness. Jack tapped the steering wheel with 2 fingers, his thick gloves squeaking against the worn leather. He'd been hauling long enough to know when fatigue started to sink in, and tonight, it was pressing hard. His eyes burned. His jaw ached from chewing stale gum to stay awake. The digital clock on the dash read 1:43 a.m., its pale green glow mocking him with each passing minute. The next town wasn't far now, maybe 30 miles, but out here, on the frozen back roads of interior Alaska, 30 miles could feel like forever. The windshield wipers screeched rhythmically, pushing aside clumps of snow, only for the wind to slam more across the glass. Beyond the cone of his headlights, the world was a void, just swirling white-black pines and the occasional glimpse of frozen creek water glinting like glass. He thought of his wife back home, asleep in their small house near Anchorage, and of his son's voicemail waiting on his phone, something about a school project he wanted help with. Normal things. Soft anchors to cling to in the middle of this endless night. Jack adjusted the heater, took a gulp of lukewarm coffee, and muttered to himself. Just a few more miles. A motel bed, a hot shower, and he'd be done. Nothing unusual. Just another winter run. The snow lessened as he descended into a shallow valley, the trees pressing close to the road. The silence out there was suffocating. He could almost feel it pressing on the cab when the radio briefly cut out, leaving only the hum of the engine and the occasional crunch of snow under his tires. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing, watching the highway curve ahead into a darker stretch. Something about the night felt unusually still. Even the wildlife seemed absent. No deer, no fox darting across the road. Just emptiness. He shrugged it off, fiddling with the radio dial until the static smoothed back into faint music. His eyelids drooped, but he blinked hard and sat up straighter. Nothing out here but him, the truck, and the snow. And then he saw the figure. At first, he thought, it was a mirage of fatigue, the shape of someone walking at the edge of his high beams, trudging slowly along the shoulder. Jack's heart skipped. The man, or what looked like a man, was barefoot. The pale skin of his feet shone against the black pavement, his legs bare below ragged trousers that clung wetly to him. The figure's arms hung stiffly at his sides, his gait mechanical, like each step was forced out of joints that didn't want to bend. Jack slowed instinctively, the truck's brakes sighing as he brought the 18-wheeler down to a crawl. His wipers dragged across the glass, revealing the man more clearly. No jacket, no gloves, just a thin shirt soaked through with snow. His head was lowered, dark hair plastered to his skull, and steam, or perhaps mist, curled faintly from his shoulders as though the warmth of his body was fighting the cold air and losing. Jesus Christ, Jack muttered, rolling down his window a crack. Hey, you all right? The figure didn't respond, just kept walking, mechanical and slow. Jack felt a prickle crawl along the back of his neck. No sane man should be out here without boots, not in this weather. He eased the truck to the shoulder, the engine rumbling low, and leaned across to open the passenger side door. Get in, you'll freeze to death out there. The man stopped. His head lifted just slightly, and for a moment Jack thought he saw hollow eyes glinting in the reflection of his headlights. Then, wordlessly, the figure stepped off the snowbank and climbed into the cab. Not into the passenger seat, as Jack expected, but into the back, onto the small bench behind him where his extra gear lay. The man's movements were stiff, deliberate, each one creaking like an old hinge. He settled there without speaking, his wet clothes soaking into the fabric. Jack swallowed hard, glancing back. "You okay, buddy? Where you headed?" The man gave only the faintest nod, his face still shadowed. No words. Jack gripped the wheel tighter. Something was wrong. He could feel it in the way the air in the cab shifted. Colder, damper. His breath came out thicker now, curling white in front of him. He cranked the heater higher. The vents hissed, but the warmth seemed swallowed whole before it reached him. He drove on, headlights carving through the blizzard, the road ahead leading toward town. Every now and then, he glanced in the rearview mirror. The figure sat perfectly, still, eyes staring forward at nothing, his skin pale as ice. The silence stretched on, broken only by the drone of the engine and Jack's own uneasy breathing. Minutes dragged. Jack tried again. "You got family in town? Need me to drop you? Somewhere?" Nothing. Not even the twitch of a lip. Just that eerie stillness. The windshield fogged slightly despite the cold. Jack wiped it with his sleeve, cursing under his breath. He thought of stories he'd heard from other drivers. Strange hitchhikers, people vanishing on the ice roads, old legends the natives whispered about spirits wandering frozen forests. He forced a laugh at himself. Fatigue, that was all. A tired brain conjuring shadows. But when he looked back in the mirror again, his heart lurched. Frost was spreading across the seat where the stranger sat, tiny crystals creeping outward like veins glistening in the dim light. The fabric darkened with moisture, then hardened, rimed with ice. Jack's throat went dry. He gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles whitening. He could hear it now, the faint crackle of ice forming, spreading slowly, methodically, like the sound of branches snapping in the cold. His radio sputtered, the music warping into a deep, distorted hum. For a second, a voice whispered through the static. He couldn't make out the words, but it raised every hair on his arms. He slammed the dial off, the sudden silence even worse. He drove faster, eyes fixed on the faint glow of town lights just visible in the distance. 10 more miles, maybe less, just get there, just get the passenger out. The cold deepened. His breath came heavy now, clouding the cab. The steering wheel burned icy through his gloves and his teeth began to chatter. He glanced back, couldn't stop himself. The man's face was visible now in the faint glow. His skin was gray-blue, lips cracked, eyes sunken and pale. He did not blink. Frost clung to his hair, spreading outward, little needles of ice forming at his collar and drifting down his arms. Jack's heart pounded. He pressed the accelerator, the truck shuddering as it sped toward town. The figure's head tilted just slightly, as though acknowledging Jack's fear. No sound. No movement beyond that. And then, the frost spread faster. Up the walls of the cab, across the windows, rhyming the inside of the windshield until Jack could barely see. He swiped frantically at the glass, breath ragged, vision tunneling. The headlights caught the "Welcome to Fairbanks" sign as he barreled past, relief flooding him. Almost there. Almost safe. He pulled into the first gas station at the edge of town, slamming the truck into park. He spun around, desperate to get the man out to end whatever nightmare had followed him here. But the seat was empty, but not untouched. Frost coated the upholstery thick as hoarfrost on a grave, glistening cruelly in the fluorescent lights of the station. The door handle on the inside was frozen solid, a thick crust of ice sealing it shut. His breath puffed white, trembling in the still air. Jack stared, his pulse thundering. The frost spread in delicate patterns across the glass, writing something, letters he couldn't fully make out before they faded like mist. He stumbled from the truck, gasping, boots crunching. On ice, the night air was warmer than the cab had been. Too warm. He bent over, hands on knees, lungs burning. Behind him, the truck loomed silent, headlights flickering, steam rising faintly from the frozen door. Inside, the frost began to melt, dripping, slowly into the fabric of the seat, leaving no trace behind but the lingering chill. Jack never picked up another hitchhiker again. But sometimes, driving late at night, when the road is empty and the snow falls heavy, he glances in the mirror and swears he sees pale eyes watching from the back seat, waiting for another ride into town. The mountains loomed over the narrow road like dark sentinels, their jagged crowns piercing the dusk sky as if tearing through the clouds themselves. Snow lined the shoulders of the asphalt, packed hard by the cold and shimmering faintly in the wash of headlights. Inside a beat-up Toyota Tacoma, two friends traveled in silence, the cab filled with the muffled hum of the engine and the faint static of an old radio that caught nothing but faint snippets of country songs drifting in and out like ghosts. Mark kept his hands steady on the wheel, knuckles pale in the glow of the dashboard lights. His companion, Jesse, reclined in the passenger seat, sipping from a thermos of coffee that had long gone lukewarm. The heater rattled at their feet, sending up a weak current of warmth, but the cabin still carried a chill that clung to their breath. Mark tapped the wheel lightly to the rhythm of the song that fought its way through static, a nervous habit more than enjoyment. Jesse's gaze drifted out the side window, where the forest pressed close to the road, a tangle of black pines, their branches hunched with snow, their shapes bending and writhing as if leaning in to watch the truck pass. The road coiled higher, cutting into the slope of the mountains. Both men had driven this way before, a shortcut that shaved an hour off the trip back to Anchorage, though neither liked it. The mountains were known for sudden snowstorms, black ice, and the occasional rock slide. It was a road meant to be endured, not savored. Still, with the hour creeping late and the winter sky already sunk into darkness, the shortcut felt necessary. Almost there, Mark muttered, mostly to himself. His eyes narrowed on the ribbon of asphalt ahead, searching for the landmark he knew was close. Jesse shifted in his seat, closing the thermos. "We should hit the tunnel soon, right? I don't remember it being this far." Mark nodded absently, jaw tightening as the truck crested a rise. And then it came into view. The tunnel, a gaping wound carved into the side of the mountain, its mouth yawning wide, swallowing the road whole. Pale frost lined the stone arch, and within, darkness seemed thicker than night itself, a blackness that the headlights could not pierce until they were right at its edge. Mark reached forward and flicked off the radio. The static vanished, replaced by the soft hiss of the heater fan and the faint creak of the suspension. The sudden silence felt weighty, as though the mountain itself had leaned down to listen. The truck rolled forward, and they entered the tunnel. At first, it was unremarkable, a concrete throat, the walls damp with condensation, their surface glistening like the hide of some buried beast. The headlights stretched ahead, illuminating the coarse stone and the occasional stalactite that dripped slow, steady water. Their tires hummed on the uneven road, the sound echoing strangely, reverberating as though multiplied. But as the beam of light swept across the walls, something caught Jesse's eye. He sat forward, squinting. "Did you see that?" Mark glanced at him, then back at the road. "See what?" "The carvings. On the wall." The truck moved on, but Jesse twisted in his seat, eyes tracing the stone. Etched into the surface were shapes, crude but deliberate. Eyes, dozens of them, carved deep into the stone, staring blankly with hollow pupils. Some were round and childlike, others sharp and angular, but all watched with the same unyielding gaze. Mark frowned, but kept driving. Probably graffiti. Miners or road workers killing time. But the carvings continued, growing stranger as they went. Mouths stretched open wide in silent screams. Claws raked into the stone as though something had tried to climb its way out of the walls themselves. In the flicker of the headlights, the details shifted, the depth of the cuts, the way the shadows pooled within them, giving the illusion that the eyes blinked, that the mouths twitched wider. Jesse reached for the dashboard and turned up the heater fan, though the cab was already stifling. His breath had quickened, fogging the glass. "Man, I don't remember this, do you?" Mark shook his head slowly. His grip on the wheel tightened. "No." The tunnel stretched on, longer than memory allowed. Mark flicked his gaze to the odometer, watching the miles tick upward, but the exit remained hidden, swallowed in black. The hum of the tires deepened, the echoes chasing each other through the concrete like whispers. Something sharp scraped the undercarriage of the truck. Both men jolted, Jesse's coffee thermos clattering to the floor. "Shit," Mark hissed, checking the rearview mirror. Nothing. Only the endless ribbon of tunnel and the choking black behind them. They drove on, silence heavier than before. The heater rattled louder, or perhaps it was their ears straining for sound. Every drip of water echoed like a footstep. Every flicker of the headlights seemed to catch movement, though when they turned their heads, the walls were bare. Minutes dragged, then half an hour. Still no end to the tunnel. Jesse checked his phone, the screen dim and useless. No signal, only the frozen time. He swallowed, his voice tight. "This doesn't make sense. It's just a tunnel. It should be 5 minutes. Tops." Mark didn't answer. His face had gone pale, jaw clenched tight. He checked the fuel gauge. The needle had dropped unnaturally low, as though they'd been driving for hours. Jesse saw it too. His voice cracked. "That's impossible. We just filled up." The truck's engine groaned louder, the headlights flickering as though the battery were straining. The carvings on the walls grew denser, covering every surface. The eyes multiplied, so many that the tunnel seemed alive with their gaze. Mark pressed the accelerator, the tires whining against the slick concrete, but the walls closed tighter, the road narrowing beneath them. A shape appeared in the rearview mirror. Mark froze, his foot hovering. The mirror showed a figure, small at first, a silhouette hunched against the wall of the tunnel. In the sweep of the headlights, it was gone, but the mirror caught it again a moment later, closer, walking behind them. "Do you see it?" Jesse whispered, not daring to turn. His hands gripped his knees hard enough to whiten the skin. Mark's voice rasped. "Don't look back." The figure followed, step for step, though the truck moved at 40, then 50 miles per hour. Its gait was unnatural, not running, not walking, but sliding forward as though the ground carried it. The headlights failed to catch it fully, but the mirror showed flashes. A mouth too wide, arms long enough to scrape the ground, and eyes that glowed with the reflection of the high beams. Jesse broke. He twisted in his seat, staring out the rear window. He gasped, a sharp, choked sound. "It's right there!" The truck swerved as Mark shouted, "Don't look at it!" The walls pressed closer, the carvings now gouges as though hundreds of hands had clawed at the stone. The tunnel pulsed with sound, a deep thrumming beat like a heartbeat echoing through their bones. The fuel gauge dropped again, the needle kissing empty. Then, at last, the faint outline of an exit appeared. Ahead, a gray halo in the black. Mark floored it, the truck roaring, tires spitting slush. The figure behind them surged forward, its form stretching, bending, arms clawing for the tailgate. Its scream, or perhaps the tunnel's own voice, rose around them. A high, keening wail that tore at their ears. They burst into the night. The truck skidded to a halt on the icy shoulder, both men gasping, hands trembling. The headlights illuminated the snow-lined road, the familiar mountainside. They had emerged back at the entrance of the tunnel, the very place they had entered. Mark shut off the engine. The silence that followed was unbearable. The fuel gauge still read nearly empty. The heater clicked as it cooled, releasing a breath of hot air like a dying sigh. Neither man spoke. They sat frozen, eyes locked on the black maw of the tunnel, waiting. The carvings at its mouth seemed deeper now, the eyes more numerous, as though the mountain itself had learned their faces. Jesse whispered finally, his voice hollow. "We never left." Mark's hand trembled as he reached for the ignition. He hesitated, staring at the gauge, at the endless dark that waited before them, and at the empty road behind. The mountain breathed cold air into the night, and somewhere deep within the tunnel something moved. And then silence, and the road had stretched endlessly through the Alaskan wilderness, a pale ribbon cutting across an ocean of white. Jack Mercer leaned forward over the wheel, his shoulders stiff from 12 hours of hauling freight through snow-slick highways and mountain passes. The hum of the diesel engine was his only companion, its rhythm as steady as a heartbeat, and the radio murmured low static punctuated by faint strains of country music. Every so often he lifted the heavy thermos from the cup holder, taking a sip of lukewarm coffee that steamed faintly in the cab's chill. His rig cut through the night like a lone ship on a frozen sea. Headlights splashed across drifts of snow piled high along the roadside, catching flecks of ice that sparkled like glass. Beyond that, the forest loomed in silent ranks. Spruce and pine, their branches heavy with frost, bowed under the weight of winter. The world was reduced to tunnel vision, the illuminated beam ahead and the endless dark pressing in from all sides. He checked the dashboard clock. Just past midnight. Another hour and he'd need to pull over, let his eyes rest before they betrayed him. Jack had always prided himself on endurance, but Alaska could wear a man thin. The vastness, the cold, the silence. None of it forgave mistakes. Out here, if you ran off the road or fell asleep at the wheel, no one would find you until spring thaw. A mile marker flicked past, half buried in snow. Jack sighed, rubbed at his temples, and scanned the road for a place to stop. He knew there was a lake near this stretch, a wide flat expanse he'd parked on before when the ground was solidly frozen, safer than pulling onto a roadside shoulder where another truck might skim too close in the dark. Sure enough, he soon spotted the turnoff, a narrow path through the trees, packed down by tire tracks. He guided the rig carefully down, branches scraping faintly against the trailer. Then suddenly the forest opened onto emptiness. The headlights spilled out over a vast sheet of ice. The lake stretched to the horizon, a gleaming mirror under the stars, white mist rolling low across its surface. Jack eased the truck forward until he was 50 yards from the shore, then killed the engine. The silence that fell was immense, almost physical, as if the whole world had been wrapped in cotton. He exhaled, breath fogging the windshield, and let the stillness sink in. He shut off the lights, leaving the cab bathed in darkness. Only the faint glow of the dashboard clock kept him, company green digits ticking over. He slid into the bunk behind the seats, pulled his sleeping bag around his shoulders, and listened to the groans of ice shifting far below. It was normal this time of year, he told himself. Lakes creaked like old bones when the temperatures dropped. Nothing to worry about. He closed his eyes and let exhaustion take him. The first sound woke him hours later. A sharp crack that shivered through the cab like a rifle shot. Jack jerked upright, heart thudding, and peered out the frosted window. The moon hung low, pale and enormous, casting a ghostly glow over the lake. Steam rose faintly from his breath as he leaned closer, scanning the ice. Nothing moved. The world remained still, frozen, eternal. He sank back into the bunk, muttering under his breath. Just the ice. Always just the ice. Yet something prickled in the pit of his stomach, a tension he couldn't shake. He rolled onto his side, pulled, the bag tighter, and willed himself to drift back. Minutes passed before the second sound came. Not a crack this time, but a hollow thump, like a fist striking a door. Jack froze. The noise came again, louder, closer. His mind raced, trying to rationalize expansion, contraction, water moving beneath. Perfectly natural. But it didn't sound natural. It sounded deliberate. The thumping turned into pounding, then, horribly, unmistakably, into screams. Muffled, desperate, echoing from beneath the ice. Jack's breath caught. He sat bolt upright, ears straining. The cab filled with those terrible cries, voices pleading, shrieking, clawing at the barrier between worlds. He scrambled into the driver's seat, fumbling for the ignition, but his hands froze over the keys, because now he could see them. Faces. Pale, distorted faces pressed against the ice just beyond the glow of his headlights. Mouths stretched wide in silent terror, eyes rolling, hands slapping at the frozen surface as if begging him to come. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Jack's chest tightened until he couldn't breathe. His rational mind screamed that it was impossible, a trick of exhaustion and shadow. Yet the pounding shook through the steel of his cab. The voices rose, overlapping, wailing in agony, until the air seemed to vibrate with their despair. His instincts finally won. He twisted the ignition. The truck roared back to life, shaking him out of paralysis. The headlights blazed brighter, sweeping across the ice, and for an instant the figures were illuminated in stark clarity. Gray skin bloated like drowned corpses, fingers bent unnaturally, eyes bulging white. Then, just as suddenly, they were gone. The ice lay empty, smooth, unmarred. Only the fog remained, drifting across the lake. The cries cut off like a severed wire, leaving only silence. Jack sat trembling, hands slick on the wheel, the engine's rumble masking the hammer of his pulse. He wanted to drive, to tear back onto the road and never look behind him. But the rational part of his brain whispered that leaving now in panic could be just as deadly. The path back to the road was narrow, and one wrong angle would strand his rig in the trees. He had to wait. He had to breathe, so he left the headlights burning, staring out into the endless white while every nerve in his body screamed to move. The hours stretched like centuries. Jack dozed fitfully in the cab, snapping awake at every creak. The heater whispered, keeping frost from the glass, but outside the lake groaned and shuddered as if restless beneath his weight. More than once he thought he saw movement, a shadow crawling just below the ice, a ripple that chased the beam of his lights. His stomach knotted tighter with each vision. At one point, the radio crackled to life. He hadn't touched it, hadn't even realized it was still on. Static hissed, then warped into faint voices. Not music, not speech, just the same screams he'd heard outside funneled now through the speakers. Jack swore and smacked the dial, shutting it off, his skin crawling. With dread, sleep became impossible. His eyes darted constantly to the mirrors, convinced he'd see someone sitting in the cab behind him. Pale face reflected in the glass. The world seemed to press closer with every passing minute. The vast lake no longer an expanse of safety, but a lid over something waiting to break through. Finally, mercifully, a pale stripe of dawn crept across the horizon. Jack had never been so grateful for light. The sky shifted from black to gray to silver, revealing the lake in its entirety. And what he saw made his blood run colder than any nightmare. There were no faces, no cracks, no signs of struggle. The ice lay perfect and pristine, as if untouched for centuries. Only his own tire tracks marred the surface, stretching out from the shore like scars. Jack sat frozen, staring through the windshield. His mind reeled, trying to reconcile the night's horrors with the calm tableau before him. Had he dreamt it? Hallucinated from exhaustion and too much caffeine? Was it all in his head? He started the engine again, hands shaking, and guided the truck back to the road. The forest swallowed him once more, trees rising like silent witnesses on either side. Behind him, the lake gleamed in the early light, serene, innocent, betraying nothing of the screams that had clawed at his ears. Jack never told anyone about that night. Not his fellow truckers, not the dispatchers, not even his family. Who would believe him? Better to let the memory rot in silence than risk being thought insane. But sometimes when he drove past another frozen lake in the dead of winter, he felt the same prickle rise along his spine. Sometimes in the dead hours between midnight and dawn, when the radio slipped into static, he thought he heard those voices again. And sometimes, when he parked to rest, he swore he could still see faint handprints in the frost on his windshield. Prints too small, too many, to ever have been his. The heater hummed low inside the car, fogging the windows despite the bitter cold pressing from outside. Emma rubbed her gloved hands together, pulling the wool tighter around her wrists as she glanced sideways at her husband. Daniel's face was locked in concentration, eyes fixed on the narrow road that carved its way through a forest of skeletal trees. Snow fell in uneven waves, light one moment, then heavy as though the sky had decided to empty its weight in sudden bursts. The headlights cut into the white, their beams bouncing back with tiny flakes that blurred everything beyond a dozen feet. Daniel reached forward and turned the radio dial, static crackling before a faint song bled through. Something warm and old, the kind of tune that played in diners late at night. Emma smiled faintly at it, tilting her head against the cold glass. "This road feels endless," she said softly. He chuckled, though it sounded hollow. "That's rural Virginia for you. One wrong turn and you're wandering the back roads until sunrise. At least we're almost to the cabin." The word cabin sounded like salvation. They had planned this getaway for months, trading city noise for silence, deadlines for woods. Emma imagined steam rising from mugs of cocoa, blankets wrapped tight, fire popping in a stone hearth. She could almost smell it, the mix of pine and smoke. But the forest outside did not feel like peace. The branches loomed and twisted, each coated with frost that glistened like bones under the headlights. Somewhere deeper in, unseen but felt, an animal let out a sharp cry, and then silence pressed back like a lid over a box. Emma rubbed the fog from the window with her sleeve and looked ahead. The road wound like a pale ribbon into the dark, swallowed by trees that seemed to bend inwards, watching. For a long stretch, neither of them spoke. Only the crunch of tires on ice and the occasional sigh of the heater filled the car. Emma reached for her coffee in the cup holder, steam curling up from the lid, warming her nose before she sipped. Her eyes felt heavy, lulled by the rhythm of the road. But then she blinked, frowning. "Did you see that?" she asked. Daniel leaned forward, slightly. "See what?" "I thought—" She hesitated. Up ahead, where the road bent left into thicker trees, a faint glow pulsed. It wasn't headlights, not the sharp glare of a car. This was softer, golden, like the sway of a lantern. "There," she whispered, pointing. Daniel slowed the car instinctively. The beams of their headlights reached forward, slicing through, flurries of snow, and yes, there it was. A lone light bobbing gently in the distance, as if someone were walking the road ahead of them with a lantern swinging at their side. "What the hell?" Daniel muttered. Emma felt a strange chill creep into her chest, though the heater was still humming. Who would be out here? The lantern swayed slowly, deliberate. With every second they drove, it seemed to drift a little further ahead. Never closer, never farther, just enough to tease. "Maybe a hunter," Daniel said, though even as he said it, doubt painted his voice. "At night?" Emma whispered. They drove on, tires crunching slowly over ice, following the glowing bob in silence. Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He flicked his eyes to the dashboard clock. 11:42 p.m. Too late for hikers, too far from town, for pedestrians. As the road curled tighter into the woods, the lantern veered off, slipping between the trees. For a moment, its glow flickered behind the trunks, vanishing, reappearing, until it was a soft shimmer deeper in the forest. Daniel slowed to a crawl. "You saw that too, right?" Emma nodded, her heart thumping louder than the hum of the tires. The glow drifted deeper between the trees, swaying like a pendulum. "That's not normal," she whispered. "No," Daniel admitted. His voice was tight. Then, without warning, the lantern burst into blinding brilliance. One moment it was a soft golden sway in the trees. The next it was right there, inches in front of the windshield, flooding the car with searing white light. Daniel shouted and slammed the brakes. The tires shrieked on ice, the car fishtailed. Emma screamed, her coffee spilling across her coat. The world spun into chaos, headlights slicing the trees, snow blurring everything. Then silence. The lantern was gone. Only the steady thud of their hearts filled the air. Daniel panted, gripping the wheel so hard his knuckles gleamed white. Emma stared through the windshield, her breath fogging in rapid bursts, and then she saw it. "Daniel?" Her voice was barely sound. He followed her gaze and his blood ran, cold. Across the inside of the windshield, clear as frost, etching glass, were handprints, dozens of them. Fresh, distinct, pressed from the outside in, each palm wide, each finger long, dripping frost trails down the glass. Emma choked on her breath. They weren't there before. The heater hummed, The radio whispered static, and the forest outside leaned closer. Daniel shifted the car into drive with trembling hands, his foot pressing the gas harder than needed. The tires spun before catching, propelling them forward. Neither of them spoke, but the silence inside was a scream. The snow thickened. The forest seemed to close in, swallowing the road. Every few seconds, Emma swore she saw it. The faint flicker of light in the corner of her vision, the sway of something golden just beyond the trees. "Don't look at it," Daniel muttered, his voice shaking. But Emma couldn't stop herself. Minutes stretched like hours. The road wound and twisted, and the glow appeared again. This time, in the rearview mirror. A soft lantern sway, bobbing along as if it followed at a steady pace. Daniel slammed the mirror upward with his palm, angling it at the roof. He didn't want to see. The heater groaned, then sputtered. The warm air dulled, turning into thin, cold drafts that bit at their faces. Emma rubbed her hands furiously. "Why is it getting colder?" Daniel didn't answer. His eyes darted to the sides of the road, to the branches that looked like reaching, arms to the curves that bent into shadows. Then the radio cracked. Static fizzled, then warped into a voice, faint, distorted, like words pulled through water. Emma's breath caught. The voice wasn't clear, but the rhythm was. It sounded like someone singing, a slow, haunting lullaby. Daniel smacked the dial, twisting, but every station was the same. A warped melody, a voice that wasn't a voice. Emma clapped her hands over her ears. "Turn it off." The radio clicked silent. The car groaned under the cold. The windows fogged again, but this time the fog seemed to rise from outside, curling over the glass like smoke. Then came the sound. Tap. 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 Emma's eyes shot to the passenger window. 3 long handprints dragged down the glass, leaving streaks of frost. Her scream tore through the car. Daniel floored the gas, the engine howling. The tires caught, skidding, then launching them forward. Trees blurred, snow flew, and still the tapping came. Now from the back window, the side mirror, the windshield again. Fingers of frost, endless and reaching. Daniel's breath came in ragged gasps. His eyes burned with terror. "Hold on," he shouted. The lantern appeared again, suddenly, right in the middle of the road ahead. Daniel swerved. The car spun, the world tilted, snow erupted in sheets. Emma's scream cut through the night as the vehicle careened sideways into a drift, smashing against a buried log. The airbags exploded with a muffled thud. For a moment, silence. Emma coughed, her chest tight from the impact. The lantern glow seeped through the shattered windshield. Daniel turned his head slowly, his breath frosting in the air. Through the spiderweb cracks of the glass, the light hovered just feet away, and standing behind it, though the light obscured most, was a figure. Tall, thin, shoulders sloped. The lantern dangled from one impossibly long arm, swinging gently. Its head tilted in a way that no humans should tilt. Emma's voice broke into a whisper. "It's watching us." The figure did not move closer. It only stood, lantern swaying, light pulsing like a heartbeat. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it faded. The lantern dissolved into the falling snow, leaving only blackness, and the echo of its glow burned into their eyes. The silence after was unbearable. Daniel turned the key. The engine sputtered, then caught. He didn't wait, didn't speak, just pressed the gas, wrenching the wheel until the car clawed free from the drift. They lurched forward, headlights cutting the forest once more. Neither of them spoke until the road widened, the trees thinning, the snow easing into lighter flurries. Only when the outline of the cabin appeared in the distance, dark, waiting, did Emma finally find her voice. "Daniel, the windshield." He glanced. The frost handprints were still there, not fading, not melting, multiplying. By the time they pulled into the cabin drive, the entire windshield was covered in them. Palms pressed so close together they overlapped. 100 desperate marks frozen in the glass. Daniel killed the engine, chest heaving. Emma reached for his hand, trembling. Neither moved to get out. And from somewhere deep in the woods, Faint but certain came the sway of golden light, drifting between the trees, still watching. Snow hissed against the windshield, a constant white curtain that the wipers barely managed to push aside. Daniel's hands clenched the steering wheel, his knuckles pale beneath the dashboard light. He had been driving for hours, the long Alaskan road stretching endlessly, swallowed by the storm. His thermos of coffee had gone lukewarm on the passenger seat, and his eyes burned from the fatigue of squinting through the swirling snow. The radio had given up 20 miles back, sputtering into static before fading into silence, leaving only the low drone of the truck's engine and the crunch of tires over the frozen road. He had promised himself he'd pull over once he found somewhere safe, a gas station, a diner, anything with light and warmth. But for hours there had been nothing, just the road, trees lining either side like blackened skeletons, and the storm. When the glow appeared through the snow, Daniel thought it was a trick of exhaustion. A faint red blur, then brighter, sharper, words forming in the icy haze. Vacancy. A neon sign, flickering against the storm, beckoning him like a flare in the wilderness. Beneath it stood a squat, L-shaped building with peeling, white paint, windows glowing dimly yellow behind frost. The sign above the office read, Pinewood Motel. Daniel let out a shaky breath. Salvation. He pulled into the small parking lot, the snow already piling high against the curbs. The motel looked dated, maybe built in the 60s, but the lights were on, and that was all that mattered. He turned off the engine, the sudden silence ringing in his ears, then grabbed his duffel from the back seat and hurried through the snow to the office. The little lobby smelled faintly of mildew and old coffee. A heater rattled in the corner, coughing out warm, dusty air. Behind the counter, a clerk sat stiffly on a stool. His skin was waxy pale, his hair slicked neatly to one side, and his eyes, though fixed on Daniel, didn't seem to blink. Need a room, Daniel said, his voice rough with fatigue. The clerk's lips moved slowly, like he had to remind himself how to speak. Of course. One night? Daniel nodded. The clerk slid a tarnished brass key across the counter. Room 6. Down. The hall, please enjoy your stay. There was no request for ID, no credit card, just the key. Daniel hesitated but then shrugged it off. He was too tired to care. The corridor stretched narrow and dim, carpet stained with years of use. Doors lined both sides, each one with faint, yellow light seeping out from beneath. As he passed, Daniel noticed something strange. Through the thin gaps in the curtains, he could see the glow of televisions flickering inside every room. And in each one, a figure sat on the bed, motionless, silhouettes staring straight ahead at the screen. None of them moved, none turned as he passed. Just still shadows transfixed by their televisions. He tried not to look too closely, quickened his steps, and found room 6. The door creaked open to reveal a space no different from the others. Faded wallpaper, an old TV set on the dresser, a bedspread patterned in ugly brown swirls. He set his bag down, kicked off his boots, and collapsed onto the bed. The sheets were cold, but exhaustion won over discomfort. He barely noticed as his eyes closed and sleep pulled him under. Daniel woke to the sound of static. It was faint at first, a low hum bleeding into his dream, but then it grew louder. He blinked into the darkness. The storm outside had subsided to a muffled whisper, snow pressing against the window. The room itself was still, except for the television. The old box set sat across the room, its screen glowing gray, static hissing like a swarm of bees. Daniel sat up, heart quickening. He was certain he hadn't turned it on. He swung his legs off the bed, crossed the cold carpet, and reached for the power dial. But just before he touched it, the static shifted. The gray snow on the screen warped, shapes forming like shadows behind frosted glass. And then the image snapped into focus. Daniel froze. It was his room, his bed, his duffel bag on the chair. The angle was from the ceiling corner, as if filmed by a security camera. And on the bed, lit by the screen's glow, was him. Daniel watched himself sleep, chest rising and falling beneath the covers. But the image wasn't live, his body on. The screen twitched, rolled onto its side, seconds after he had already sat up. The broadcast was delayed, like he was watching his own past unfold a heartbeat too late. The hair on his arms stood on end. He grabbed the remote from the nightstand and jabbed the power button. The screen went black, leaving only his reflection staring back. His breath trembled. He told himself the wiring was old, the signal picking up some kind of loop. He had seen motel TVs act strange before, pulling signals from who knew where. But his gut told him different. Sleep wouldn't come again. Daniel sat upright in bed. Every creak of the building amplified in his ears. The storm outside had quieted to a muffled hush, but inside, the motel seemed alive with faint sounds. Footsteps in the hallway, doors softly closing, the drone of televisions through the walls. At 2:17 a.m., he checked the clock on the nightstand. That's when he heard it. The faint click of his doorknob turning. His chest seized. He stared at the door, holding his breath. The knob didn't move again, but he was certain he'd heard it. Rising, he crept across the room and pressed his ear to the wood. Nothing. No footsteps. No movement. Just silence. Finally, he turned back toward the bed and stopped cold. The television was on again. This time, the picture was sharper, brighter. It showed the hallway outside his room. The camera angle looked down the corridor, each door glowing, faintly at the edges. The screen flickered, and one by one, the doors began to open, slowly, deliberately, and out stepped the guests. Daniel's stomach twisted. He recognized them, the motionless figures he'd glimpsed earlier through the curtains. Now they were moving, stepping into the hallway, their heads turning in eerie unison toward the lens. Their faces were pale, slack, eyes wide and empty, mouths slightly parted as if caught mid-breath, and then, as if on cue, they all turned toward room 6. The screen flickered, and Daniel's door rattled as if struck from the other side. He stumbled back, heart hammering, and grabbed his boots, fumbling to slip them on. The door shook harder, the knob twisting, then slamming against the latch. The television hissed louder, the figures pressing closer to the screen, their faces stretching and blurring like melting wax. Daniel bolted. He yanked the door open and sprinted into the hall. The corridor seemed endless, the carpet swallowing his footsteps as he ran. Doors lined either side, but none offered escape. Each one stood ajar, televisions glowing within. And inside every room, the guests were rising, standing stiffly from their beds, heads jerking toward him as if drawn by invisible strings. He ran past them, past door after door, until the hallway itself seemed to shift, stretching longer, bending at angles that hadn't been there before. The lights overhead flickered, plunging him into strobing shadows where figures loomed and vanished with every pulse. Somewhere behind him, he heard the creak of synchronized footsteps, dozens of them, moving together in mechanical rhythm. Daniel burst into the lobby, chest burning, but the clerk was still behind the counter. He hadn't moved, hadn't even blinked. His smile was plastered on, unnatural in its stillness. "Check out?" the clerk asked calmly, voice hollow. Daniel didn't answer. He shoved the glass door open and staggered into the storm. The snow had buried his truck nearly to the windows, the neon vacancy sign flickering weakly above. He clawed at the driver's side, scraping ice with his bare hands, but when he looked up, he saw them. The guests were outside now. They stood in the parking lot, lining the edge of the snow like statues, their thin motel robes flapping in the wind. Their eyes reflected the neon glow, unblinking, their faces blank yet intent. And then all at once their heads tilted in the same direction, toward him. Daniel scrambled into the truck, jamming the key into the ignition. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. Headlights cut through the snow, illuminating rows of figures advancing slowly, deliberately, feet crunching in perfect unison. He slammed the accelerator. Tires spun against the ice, then caught. The truck lurched forward, plowing through the storm, leaving the motel shrinking in the rearview mirror. But even as it vanished into the white, the neon sign flickered once more, brighter this time, its glow bleeding into the snow like blood into water. Hours later, Daniel pulled into a rest, Stop far down the highway. His hands shook as he killed the engine. He sat in silence, breath ragged, listening to the tick of cooling metal. The storm had eased. The night sky cracked with faint stars. For the first time since the motel, he felt almost safe, until he saw the glow. Through the windshield, across the lot, a dim yellow light spilled from a small building he hadn't noticed before. A sign buzzed faintly in the dark, half buried in snow. Pinewood Motel, and inside, through the frosted windows, rows of televisions flickered in perfect unison. Snow pressed itself into endless sheets of white across the Alaskan highway, swallowing the road until it was just a thin ribbon of gray against the wilderness. The cab of the truck rattled as wind whipped across the windshield, the heater groaning in protest against the outside cold. Inside, Doug Jensen adjusted the knob on the radio, hoping to catch even a scrap of music to fight the monotony. Static, then a burst of country, then static again. He sighed, gave up, and reached for his coffee, the thermos tucked between the seats, still giving off faint curls of steam. Doug had been driving for 12 hours already, hauling frozen goods from Anchorage to Fairbanks. He was used to the road, used to the silence that came with it, but tonight felt heavier somehow. The darkness wasn't just absence of light. It seemed alive, a presence pressing at the edges of his headlights. He leaned forward, knuckles tight around the steering wheel, watching the snowflakes as they streaked sideways like tiny arrows. He thought about home, his wife asleep by now, his boy probably staying up late with his new video game. Doug smiled faintly at the thought. He drove nights to give them mornings. That was the rhythm. A man alone with his truck, trading hours of silence for the warmth of family at the other end. He took another sip of coffee, humming tunelessly. Nothing but the drone of tires, the faint rattle of the heater, the crackle of static. The road stretched endless, framed by skeletal pines weighed down with frost. Miles passed in measured intervals, the green glow of mile markers, the crunch of ice under the tires when the pavement roughened, the occasional glimmer of frozen rivers in the moonlight. Normal. Routine. But as he squinted into the white haze ahead, Doug thought he saw movement. Headlights faint at first, then brighter. 3 of them, aligned perfectly in a row. He eased off the accelerator as they grew closer, watching. The lights moved together, the silhouettes of 3 trucks carving a path down the road ahead of him. A convoy, he thought, maybe hauling something military. Not unusual on this stretch. Still, there was something about the way they moved, so smooth, so perfectly matched, that tugged at his attention. Convoys had gaps, delays, little hiccups. This was precise. Too precise. He blinked, adjusted his eyes against the glare of snow and lights, and tried to shake it off. Just trucks. Men doing their job like him. Nothing strange in that. The miles rolled beneath his tires, and the convoy stayed ahead. Their taillights glowed red in rhythm, slowing when he slowed, speeding when he sped. He turned the radio knob again, trying to distract himself. Static. A warbling note like a voice, then gone. He frowned, leaned closer. The air inside the cab felt a degree colder, though the heater kept churning. His knuckles itched. Something about those trucks set him on edge. He checked his mirrors. Nothing behind him but empty road, black stretching into black. He tried again to laugh at himself. Long night, tired eyes. But when the convoy slowed suddenly, he felt his chest tighten. He eased the truck down to match their pace, the 3 hulking shadows ahead still in eerie lockstep. Finally, curiosity outweighed caution. Doug pushed the accelerator, letting his rig groan forward. He wanted to pass, to see the drivers' faces, to break the illusion of their perfect formation. He pulled closer, headlights brushing across the back of the last truck. The metal surface gleamed pale, edges rimed with ice. He expected exhaust, tail lights flickering, some sign of heat. Instead, nothing. The windows were opaque with frost. The license plate half buried under ice. Doug squinted, confusion crawling under his skin. These trucks weren't just cold. They looked frozen solid. With a surge of unease, he swung into the oncoming lane to pass. His headlights raked across the convoy in sequence. The second truck, the first. Same story. Glass frosted over, metal sheened with ice so thick it glistened like crystal. Their engines were silent, not rumbling, not alive. But they moved, wheels turning, rolling forward as though guided by some invisible momentum. His breath caught. No driver, no glow on the dashboards, just hulks of steel gliding in eerie unison. Heart hammering, Doug pressed the accelerator harder, pulling past the first truck and back into his lane. For a long moment he stared into the road ahead, throat dry. His mind scrambled for explanations. Staged vehicles, hallucination, exhaustion. He touched the dash, the familiar hum of his own engine grounding him. His coffee thermos steamed faintly, reassuring. He was real. He was here. But the convoy behind him? He couldn't resist. He glanced at the mirror. The trucks were gone. His stomach dropped. Empty highway stretched behind him, snow swirling in his red taillights. No headlights, no convoy. As if they had never been there at all. Doug gripped the wheel tighter, pulse pounding in his ears. He muttered to himself, tried to laugh, but it came out thin. Maybe he had drifted, imagined it. Hours on the road did strange things. He rubbed his eyes, kept driving. Minutes passed. Silence pressed harder now, filling the cab until he swore he could hear the blood moving in his own head. Then, light. A glow in the mirror, one set of headlights, then another, then a third. Doug's breath caught as the convoy reappeared in his rear view, their beams slicing through the snow, aligned perfectly as before. Only this time, they weren't ahead. They were behind, and they were following him. The sound of his own truck seemed suddenly fragile, the engine's hum too small against the encroaching presence. He pressed the accelerator, the tires skidding faintly against a patch of ice before gripping again. The headlights in his mirror did not waver, did not shrink. They matched him speed for speed, sweat prickled his palms despite the cold. He switched the radio on again, desperate for anything. Static. Then a low, garbled voice, rising and falling like words spoken underwater. His heart lurched. He slammed the knob off, silence roaring louder than before. He dared not look back too long, eyes flicking between road and mirror. The trucks gained, then held, never swerving, never faltering. He thought of pulling over. Absurd idea. He thought of honking, signaling. More absurd. His only thought now was forward. Forward until there was light, until there was life. But the miles rolled endless. No gas stations, no cabins, no passing cars. Just him, the snow, the black sky pressing down, and the convoy behind. They drew closer. He could see now the outlines clearer in the mirror. Frost covering every inch, wheels spinning in silence. His chest heaved as he realized what he had missed before. The tires didn't kick up snow. They rolled without contact, the road beneath them untouched. Doug's vision blurred with panic. He wiped his eyes, refocused, but the truth remained. The convoy floated just inches above the asphalt, gliding soundless in the dark. His breath came ragged. He pressed the pedal harder, the engine groaning. The headlights behind him pulsed brighter, filling the cab with pale glow. They were too close. Far too close. He could feel something pushing against him, like pressure in his chest, like invisible hands forcing him down. The truck surged, filling his mirror until it was nothing but blinding light. Doug cried out, swerving, the tires screeching against ice. His coffee thermos toppled, steam hissing across the floor. His rig fishtailed, his arms locked against the wheel, heart pounding like thunder. And then, black. When his eyes snapped open, the road was empty again. His truck rolled steady, his hand still clamped on the wheel. The mirror showed nothing but night. No headlights. No convoy. He gasped, shuddering. His chest ached as if something had been pressing hard against it. He forced a laugh, choked. Maybe he'd dozed. Maybe he'd lost minutes. He rubbed his face, trying to steady himself. Ahead, the horizon lightened faintly, dawn coming at last. Doug exhaled, relief trembling through him. Just another story to shake off at home. Just another trick of a tired mind. He drove on, counting the miles, clinging to the thought of his wife's coffee, his son's sleepy grin. But as the first streak of daylight split the sky, Doug caught a flicker in his mirror. 3 headlights, perfectly aligned. They blinked once, twice, then steadied. And though the sun rose, chasing shadows from the snow, those lights burned colder than ever, as if they had been waiting for him all along. The road stretched ahead like a ribbon of pale steel, flanked by forests so thick with frost that even the tallest pines seemed to groan under the weight of their icy crowns. Snowflakes drifted down in lazy spirals, catching the glow of the truck's headlights and turning the night into a world of glittering gray. James Callahan gripped the steering wheel, the leather worn smooth from decades of long-haul routes, and exhaled into the chill that seeped through the cracked heater vent. His coffee, once steaming and bitter, had cooled in its paper cup on the dashboard. The truck's radio, a crackling companion on lonely nights, sputtered between static bursts of old country songs and emergency traffic updates he barely registered. He had been driving for hours, the white wilderness around him unbroken except for the faint outlines of distant trees and the occasional utility pole leaning against the wind. He adjusted the rearview mirror, catching glimpses of his own tired eyes reflected against the streaked windshield. A photo of his daughter, Emily, taped to the visor, smiled back at him. He wasn't supposed to be out this late. Too many accidents happened in these parts, but a shipment had fallen behind schedule, and James had a reputation for finishing what he started. There was comfort in the routine, the rhythmic crunch of tires over packed snow, the hum of the engine, the faint scent of pine and exhaust mixing in the cab. Normal, familiar, safe. The highway narrowed as he approached a curve, the lines beneath, the snow almost invisible. He caught himself humming along with the radio, a song his daughter loved, a fragile thread tying him back to home. The storm outside was relentless, but inside the cab, life felt controlled. He sipped at the now lukewarm coffee, grimaced, and set it down, reaching for the CB to check in with the dispatch, another voice on another lonely line confirming he was still on the route. Hours passed in a blur of white and black, the monotony broken only by the occasional deer darting into the woods or the distant glint of a frozen stream. The road was empty, save for his truck and the tire tracks he left behind fading into the unbroken expanse of snow. Yet something felt off. James couldn't pinpoint it, but there was a faint feeling of being watched, the kind that made the hair along his neck prickle. He shook it off, blaming the fatigue and the storm, and focused on the road. Then, through the veil of swirling snow, a figure appeared, a small silhouette, frozen in the middle of the lane. James slammed the brakes, the tires biting into the snow with a harsh screech, and his heart thudded in his chest. The child didn't move. Not a flinch, not a step aside. A girl no older than 7 or 8, bundled in a puffy coat and a bright scarf that fluttered weakly in the wind. Her presence was surreal against the monochrome blur of the storm, her tiny figure impossibly still. James's pulse raced as he killed the engine and grabbed his flashlight from the console. Snow clung to his boots as he stepped onto the highway, the cold searing through his jacket. "Hey, hey," he called, voice cracking with concern. The child's head tilted slightly and she smiled. It was a smile that should have been innocent, but it was wrong. Teeth blackened and broken, a jagged grin that seemed to swallow the glow of the flashlight rather than reflect it. James froze. The snow swirled around her, whipping into his face and plastering his hair to his forehead. The wind carried a faint whisper, indistinct but chilling. He swallowed hard. "Are you okay?" His words caught in his throat as he stepped closer, hand outstretched, but she didn't move toward him nor away. Just stood there, small and fragile yet impossible to ignore. A gust of wind tore at his coat, and in the blink of an eye, she was gone. Only a tiny mitten lay in the snow where she had been. James bent to pick it up, fingers numb, staring at the small glove. It wasn't just a child who had vanished. It was an interruption of reality itself. The flashlight beam flickered across the snowy road as James returned to his cab, heart hammering. He drove slowly now, eyes darting to every shadow, every glimmer of movement. The road seemed longer, more treacherous, the trees pressing closer as if watching him pass. Every crackle of the radio sounded like whispered voices. Every reflection in the mirrors felt too deliberate to be his own reflection. A shadow moved across the snow ahead. No, two shadows, gliding parallel to the truck. He swerved slightly, but the shapes didn't react, didn't scatter. They mirrored, his movements sliding in perfect unison. Panic lanced through his chest. The highway, once predictable, now felt like a trap. Snow drifts grew taller, piling like small fortresses along the roadside. The wind shrieked through the trees, carrying voices he could almost understand. Phrases half-formed, pleading, mocking. James's mind raced, imagining Emily's face, her giggle, the warmth of her hand in his. He willed himself to breathe, to remain rational. Yet every instinct screamed at him that he was not alone. The road curves came faster now, each bend sharper, the snow deeper. Figures appeared and vanished along the roadside. A man with a lantern, a dog staring with hollow eyes, shadows stretching impossibly long, then snapping back to human proportions. Each sighting was fleeting, teasing the edge of his vision, leaving only doubt behind. Then the girl appeared again. In the side mirror this time, standing on the edge of the forest, staring directly into the cab. Her smile had widened, impossibly, the black teeth gleaming even in the dim interior light. James swerved violently, the truck fishtailing on the ice, and he slammed it into the shoulder, crunching through a deep drift. The engine roared in protest, then coughed and died. He sat frozen, heart in his throat, listening to the storm rage around him. A sound drew his attention, a low, wheezing giggle carried on the wind. It circled the cab, inside and out, impossible to locate. He pressed himself against the seat, eyes wide, listening. Then came a knock at the window. 3 soft raps, deliberate, from the driver's side. James's breath fogged the glass as he leaned forward. Nothing but the snow outside, swirling in chaotic eddies. The mitten lay on the floor, untouched, yet the air around it seemed charged, humming with some invisible tension. Desperation clawed at him. He started the engine, trying to ignore the pounding in his skull, the way the road seemed to lengthen unnaturally with every passing second. His mind conjured every story he had ever heard about haunted highways, missing travelers, children who were not children. The storm's howl intensified, rattling the cab, and in the periphery of his vision, shapes moved among the trees, darting closer, then retreating. Hours, or what felt like hours, passed. The highway eventually straightened, the snow thinning into a drizzle. James's hands were raw from gripping the wheel, eyes burning, pulse unsteady. Yet the highway was empty now. No shadows, no figures, no laughter. Only the rhythmic crunch of tires over melting snow and the lingering cold of something unreal brushing against the back of his neck. He reached a small gas station on the edge of a forgotten town. The lights flickered as he stepped out, every instinct still screaming. Inside, the attendant, an elderly man, looked at him strangely, not recognizing the fear etched into James's face. "Everything okay?" the man asked. James hesitated, glancing at the door, half expecting to see the girl standing there. "Yeah, fine," he murmured, voice hoarse. "Just the storm." Back on the road, he kept the truck moving, eyes scanning every curve and shadow. But every so often, when the wind shifted just right, he thought he saw her. The small figure, smiling with those black, broken teeth, standing in the middle of the lane, a mitten clutched loosely in one hand. Every time he blinked, she was gone, leaving only the lingering chill of her presence. Weeks later, James found the mitten in a drawer at home. Emily had never owned it. He kept it anyway, a small, silent testament to what he had seen, or hadn't. On some nights when the wind whistled through the pines and the snow drifted across the empty highway, he swore he could hear the soft tap of small boots behind him, the faint rustle of fabric, and that impossible giggle curling around the cab, like smoke. And when he looked in the rearview mirror, there was always the fleeting hint of a tiny face, black-toothed smile, staring back, watching, waiting. He never stopped driving that highway, compelled by something he could not name. Each trip held the same terrifying uncertainty. Would she appear? Would the snow swallow him? Or would he vanish into the storm, leaving nothing behind but a mitten in the snow? He never knew, and he feared he never would. And on some nights, when the road was silent and white, he felt her presence close enough to touch, a reminder that the world was far stranger and far darker than any man could ever truly comprehend. The snow fell thickly over the narrow logging road, muting the engine's rumble and the occasional rustle of pine needles underfoot. Alex and Jordan, both lifelong hunters and friends since high school, had set out before dawn, the horizon a fragile line of pale light above the jagged tree line. Their truck's heater hummed, filling the cab with a comfortable warmth that belied the creeping chill outside. Steam curled from the thermos between them, carrying the scent of bitter coffee. Alex adjusted the rearview mirror, catching glimpses of the dense forest behind them, each tree cloaked in ice and snow, skeletal yet beautiful in the low winter sun. Jordan fiddled with the old radio, static and faint country tunes mingling, a familiar comfort in the isolation of the Alaskan backwoods. The cabin they had left 2 hours earlier felt miles away now, reduced to a dot in the vast expanse of white. They had planned a simple hunt, nothing elaborate. Some deer, maybe a moose if luck permitted. Alex's glove brushed the steering wheel as he hummed along with the faint radio music, while Jordan made a face at the coffee, laughing at its bitterness, but sipping anyway. The forest outside seemed to stretch infinitely, silent save for the occasional caw of a crow or the creak of heavy-laden branches. Snowflakes clung to the windshield, and the truck's headlights carved twin tunnels of light through the haze. Normalcy reigned, a sense of routine warmth in the middle of frozen isolation. Hours passed and the hunters followed the familiar trail. The snow, fresh and powdery, gave way to the crunch of tire tracks and their boots when they eventually stepped out to check the scent lures. A soft wind pushed through the pines, carrying a scent of wet pine and frostbite that clung to the tips of their fingers. Alex noticed a dark shape between the trees. He blinked and it seemed gone. Jordan shrugged, focused on his own observation of the tracks. They joked about the wildlife's elusive antics, but a small knot of unease had begun to settle in the woe pit of Alex's stomach. The shadows were too deep, the silence too complete, and the snow too perfect, untouched except for their own presence. Then it came, a high, piercing scream that cut through the white silence like glass. Both men froze. The sound was female, ragged, panicked, yet strangely distant, echoing from every direction at once. Alex's hands tightened on the wheel as Jordan's face drained of color. "You hear that?" Jordan whispered, barely audible over the still thick air. Alex nodded, eyes scanning the tree line, but all he saw was the unbroken white, unmarked except for their own tracks. Driven by instinct and the thought of someone in danger, they stepped carefully through the snow, the sound growing sharper, then receding, twisting around the forest as if the trees themselves were carrying it. They reached a clearing, the source of the scream tantalizingly near, yet elusively absent. Tied to a gnarled pine stood a scarf, red and tattered, whipping slightly in the icy breeze. No one was there. Alex reached out, the material brittle in his gloves, and shivered despite the heater in the truck. "Must be someone playing a trick," Jordan said, voice tight, though his jaw betrayed tension. The screams resumed, circling, closer now. Yet, when they looked for footprints in the fresh snow, none appeared. The snow was pristine, as though nothing had disturbed it. Fear, subtle but insistent, began to creep up their spines, a whisper that grew louder with each heartbeat. The forest seemed to respond, shadows twisting with every flicker of their flashlight beams. The wind carried whispers. Or was it the echo of the woman's scream? through the pines around them, between the branches. Every instinct screamed to turn back, to abandon curiosity, but neither man could move. They were rooted to the spot, their senses taut. The screams came again, louder, almost human in rhythm, but distorted, unnatural. Their breaths came in visible puffs, fog curling in the still, freezing air. The scarf swayed as if it were alive. A silent sentinel tied to a tree in a place no one had been. A cruel invitation that neither wanted to accept yet could not resist. Hours, or maybe minutes, time distorted in the chilling stillness, passed as they circled the clearing, following. The echoes that darted from tree to tree, shapes flickered at the periphery of vision, shadows that moved with impossible intent. Every crack of a branch, every whisper of wind, seemed amplified into threats. The snow around them grew inexplicably deeper, the road behind swallowed by drifting piles erasing their path home. A figure or a trick of the light flickered across the snow, gone when eyes snapped to focus. The radio sputtered, static filling the silence, but amid the white noise came faint, fragmented voices, laughter, crying, screaming. Alex's heartbeat thudded so violently he feared Jordan would hear it over the din of the forest. The wind shifted, cold and sharp, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and rot. Suddenly the screams multiplied, not just from one direction, but many, from all around. The forest itself seemed alive, breathing, circling them. The shadows converged, shifting, between branches and trunks, impossible angles and fleeting glimpses of shapes that resembled nothing known to man. Jordan froze, pointing toward a tree where the shadows pooled, stretching unnaturally downward, black tendrils of night curling toward them. They felt watched, hunted. The scarf, still tied to the tree, seemed to twitch as though it were aware of their gaze. Every instinct screamed to flee, but the snow resisted their steps, every footfall heavy, as though the ground itself had turned traitor. Then came the sound of crunching. Footsteps. On snow too pristine to hold prints. Alex turned, flashlight stabbing through the night, catching nothing but empty trees. And then he saw it. Movement in the truck mirror, behind him, yet no one was there. A flash of pale skin, a figure with impossibly long limbs standing too tall, frozen mid-step. He blinked and it was gone. Jordan grabbed his arm, pointing into the darkness, eyes wide. The wind carried voices now, pleading, crying, whispering warnings in an unintelligible tongue, yet familiar, ancient, their senses distorted. The snow seemed to rise and fall like waves, the trees leaned closer and shadows lunged, slipping back before they could look directly. Panic surged. They ran, stumbling through the snow, but the forest twisted against them, familiar paths now alien, leading them in circles. The screams surrounded them, sometimes behind, sometimes ahead, always just out of reach. The scarf appeared again, impossibly now several trees away, flapping in the wind though they had moved dozens of yards. Shapes formed in the corner of their eyes. Faces, hands, eyes gleaming black, vanishing before recognition. Their breaths came in ragged gasps, lungs burning, snow in their hair, freezing their eyelashes. The world had become a living, breathing trap, alive with intent and malice, feeding on their fear. And then the forest fell silent. Absolute suffocating quiet, broken only by the crunch of their own feet. Alex dared to glance back and caught a glimpse in the mirror. The shadow figure standing at the edge of the road, impossibly still, impossibly close, yet the snow between them untouched. Jordan's scream tore from his throat as the figure dissolved, scattering into the trees like smoke. The radio sparked violently, then died. The thermos fell, spilling bitter coffee into the snow, steam rising like a signal to something unseen. The night air became heavier, every breath sharp and metallic. They pressed on, hearts hammering, following what seemed a road. But the snow shifted, hiding tire marks, swallowing their path, keeping them isolated, stranded. Dawn's pale light finally broke through the trees, though the forest remained oppressive, alien. They emerged, exhausted, frozen, near the old logging station they had passed earlier. The truck sat where they left it, headlights off, engine cold. No sign of disturbance except for the scarf, now draped across the windshield, wet with frost, tied neatly as though placed by careful hands. Neither man spoke. They climbed in, shivering, and drove off slowly, watching the trees thin into the open, the screams finally gone. Or had they merely paused? Weeks later, Alex returned to the spot, alone this time, curious and haunted. The snow was gone, leaving the trail bare and empty, pristine. No footprints, no evidence, nothing but the echo of memory and dread in the silent wind. The scarf was gone. And yet when he closed his eyes at night, he could see it fluttering among the trees. A signal, a promise, a presence that had never left. And sometimes, when the wind howled through the pines, he could hear it again. Faint, distant, impossibly, close crying from all directions at once. He never spoke of that day, neither did Jordan. And sometimes, when alone in the cabin or behind the wheel of the truck, Alex swore he could feel a gaze, cold and persistent, lingering at the edge of the trees, waiting, patient, unseen. The forest had claimed its mark, and though he left, it followed, silent and eternal, a presence in the shadows, tied not to the road but to the snow, the scarf, and the memory of the cry that circled endlessly through the woods. The wind howled like a chorus of the lost as Martin gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles whitening against the worn leather. The hum of the engine was a fragile comfort, barely cutting through the blizzard that had descended hours earlier. Headlights pierced the heavy snowfall, illuminating frozen pines like towering skeletal sentinels. Steam curled from the mug of coffee wedged into the cup holder, its warmth a small human rebellion against the Arctic chill seeping through the thin insulation of his old pickup. Martin adjusted the dial on the radio, trying to catch a clearer signal. But all that came through was static and the occasional fragmented voice. He had been on this stretch of road for hours, alone, exhausted, and anxious to reach the next town before night fully swallowed the highway. The highway, or what he assumed was a highway, had become an endless ribbon of white, the mile markers indistinguishable through the swirl of snow. For Martin, this trip had been simple enough when it began. A solo run to deliver parts to a remote Alaskan lodge, a routine route he had taken countless times. His mind wandered to the mundane, the scent of his coffee, the faded dashboard, the radio jingles that crept through the static. Every now and then, he would hum along to a familiar song or glance at the passenger seat, imagining his wife there to share a joke or an idle comment. But here in the emptiness, time stretched thin. Snowflakes tapped against the windshield like skeletal fingers, and the rhythmic sweep of the wipers became hypnotic, a small tether to reality. Occasionally, a raven would skid across the ice-laden shoulder, startling him only to vanish into the swirling whiteness. The normalcy of driving, of listening to music, of sipping lukewarm coffee, grounded him in a world that still made sense. Hours passed with little more than the crunch of tires on ice and the wind's hollow whispers. Martin's truck groaned in protest at the cold, engine coughing as the fuel gauge crept toward empty. He passed familiar landmarks, or what he thought were landmarks. A collapsed road sign here, a distant snow-covered barn there, but mostly, it was the same relentless white, broken only by occasional dark silhouettes of trees. The monotony was almost meditative, yet beneath it, a gnawing feeling took root. The wind shifted, carrying sounds that seemed too deliberate. The distant rattle of metal, the creak of branches not in the wind's path, a flash in the rearview mirror, a shadow moving against the trees vanished before he could focus. He shook his head and muttered a laugh, blaming exhaustion, the lonely road, and the endless hypnotic snow. Then, without warning, the mile marker appeared through the blur, 6666. The number seemed to glow faintly, the black digits stark against the white frozen post. Martin's stomach tightened. It had been a long route, but he had never noticed anything unusual about this stretch. The radio, which had been crackling idly, snapped to a clear, urgent broadcast. "Do not stop. Do not stop. Do not stop." The voice was distorted, echoing as if in a hollow metal chamber, repeating the warning over and over. Martin twisted the dial in vain, static returning in waves, but the eerie message persisted, layered with the hiss of snow and the sigh of the wind. He laughed nervously, trying to dispel the chill that wasn't entirely from the cold. A prank? A malfunction? Yet the words gnawed at him, insistent, impossible to ignore. His eyes flicked to the fuel gauge. Empty. Panic surged. The engine sputtered, coughed and died in a shudder, leaving him coasting to a slow, inevitable stop in the middle of the snow-blanketed highway. The headlights cut weakly into the fog, illuminating the white oblivion around him. Martin's breath came invisible, puffs, each exhale tasting of copper and fear. He reached for the door handle, stepping onto ice-crusted ground. The world was silent, except for the wind that now carried a low, murmuring hum. Somewhere ahead, a faint glimmer of light appeared, ghostly against the snow, shifting, growing brighter with each heartbeat. Martin squinted through the haze, uncertain whether it was a reflection or something else entirely. He forced his legs forward, crunching through the snow, each step uneven and hesitant. As he drew closer, the sight unfolded in incomprehensible horror. Dozens of vehicles, seemingly abandoned, were encased in ice. The frozen cars jutted out from the snow like grotesque sculptures, each a tableau of halted life. And the drivers. Martin's stomach dropped as he saw them. Frozen mid-motion, hands rigid on steering wheels, faces locked in terror or disbelief, eyes wide and unblinking, mouths slightly agape as though still screaming into the void. He staggered, almost falling, every instinct screaming to run back to the warmth of his truck. Yet morbid curiosity tethered him to the scene. The headlights ahead flickered and danced across these icebound figures, revealing the unimaginable. Their eyes seemed to follow him, imploring, warning, mocking. A sudden crack echoed from behind him, the ice of a nearby car shifting. Martin whipped around, heart hammering, but saw nothing beyond the white storm. When he turned back, he noticed subtle movement among the frozen drivers, a twitch of fingers, a blink that defied explanation. Panic set in, nausea clawing at his stomach. The world had become unmoored, a frozen purgatory. The radio's voice returned, more insistent, layered with static yet undeniably commanding. Do not stop. Do not stop. Martin's feet moved on their own, carrying him forward as though some unseen force pulled him toward the heart of the frozen caravan. The closer he stepped, the clearer he saw the ice patterns, not random frost, but intricate, almost ritualistic, as if each car had been trapped deliberately, encased in a crystalline web designed to imprison more than metal. He stumbled upon a car with a driver whose face was grotesquely familiar, a mirror of his own expression just moments ago, frozen, in panic. The sight made him recoil violently, tripping over the icy road and sliding to the ground. His hands scraped against the frozen surface, pain flaring through his palms, yet his eyes could not look away. There were hundreds of them, lined like a parade of the damned, all eyes locked toward him, waiting. The wind seemed to whisper with countless voices, the words incomprehensible yet laden with malice. Martin's breathing became frantic, each inhale tasting of frost and fear. The faint headlights ahead. Were they moving? Closer? He couldn't tell, the snow and darkness conspiring to blur the edges of reality. The sense of being watched intensified, a palpable pressure pressing on his spine. Shadows shifted unnaturally in the periphery, and for a fleeting moment he thought he saw figures moving beneath the ice, writhing, clawing at their frozen prisons. The radio screamed again, static shredding the air. Do not stop. It seemed to echo off the frozen metal, a chorus of warnings and condemnations. Martin ran toward the headlights, adrenaline surging, lungs burning. Each step crunched loudly, in the quiet, punctuating the impossible tableau. A low growl emanated from the ice, a deep resonant vibration that traveled through the soles of his boots. The ground itself seemed alive, humming with an ancient, malevolent energy. As he drew closer to the light, reality bent further. More vehicles appeared from the snow, cars, trucks, buses, all frozen mid-gesture. Some faces were twisted with terror, others with anguish, all eyes glinting with unnatural life. Martin stumbled upon a bus, its passengers locked in a tableau of frozen panic. One figure, a child, turned its head slowly toward him, eyes impossibly wide, a grin stretching unnaturally across its frozen face. Martin recoiled, his heart thundering in a symphony of fear. From behind, a screech of metal tore through the storm. He spun, nearly slipping on ice, only to see a phantom vehicle barrel past, tires squealing on the invisible road, leaving behind a spectral trail of frost. He realized with a sinking horror that the road behind him had vanished, replaced by a white abyss stretching endlessly. The headlights he had been following grew impossibly bright, illuminating a car directly ahead. The windshield shimmered, ice cracking as if under invisible fingers. The vehicle's interior was obscured, yet he felt a presence, another set of eyes staring back. Martin tried the door handle of his truck, desperate to escape, but the metal was frozen solid, unyielding. The radio shrieked once more, cutting through his panic. "Do not stop! Do not stop!" He screamed at it, begged it, cursed it, but the voice persisted. Shoving through the snow, heart hammering, he approached the car in front, his reflection twisted in its icy surface. And then he saw it. His own face, staring back at him, not from the mirror, but inside the passenger seat, eyes wide, mouth frozen in terror. The impossible reflection leapt forward, a silent scream ripping through his mind. Martin stumbled back, tripping, falling hard into the icy crust. The blizzard around him seemed to pulse as if breathing, as if the very air conspired to trap him. Shapes emerged from the snow, hunched figures, arms outstretched, eyes glowing faintly, crawling toward him with unhurried precision. He scrambled to his feet, fumbling in the dark, and sprinted toward the faint headlights that promised deliverance, only to find the road ending in a wall of snow and ice. Panic reached a crescendo. He spun in place, seeing the frozen vehicles, surrounding him, hundreds of eyes fixed on him, their silent vigil unbroken. The blizzard thickened, wind biting at his face, snow blinding his vision. Martin ran blindly, chest heaving, lungs icy, until he felt the crunch of frozen metal beneath his feet. Not the road, but the shell of a car that had been buried, waiting. He tripped, sprawling across the ice, and in the pale light of the phantom headlights he glimpsed it, a figure impossibly tall, cloaked in shadow, face obscured yet radiating a malign sentience, standing at the center of the frozen convoy. It did not move, yet the entire tableau seemed to bend toward it, alive with intent. A sharp gust nearly knocked him off his feet, carrying whispers too human to ignore. The snow stilled as if listening. Martin scrambled backward, heart slamming against his ribs, yet he could not leave the headlights, could not leave the road that seemed to demand his passage. In a final act of desperation, he lunged toward a gap in the icebound cars, diving through it, crashing onto the snow beyond. He rolled, scrambled to his feet, and ran blindly into the storm, the phantom eyes of the frozen drivers following, unblinking, accusing, patient. The headlights faded as suddenly as they had appeared, swallowed by the blizzard, leaving only the endless, empty highway stretching into whiteness. Martin collapsed onto the cold snow, gasping, every muscle trembling. The wind carried a faint murmur, a final echo of the radio. "Do not stop." He looked back once, the frozen tableau gone, yet the memory of those eyes, hundreds of frozen, pleading eyes, remained, burned into his mind. Somewhere ahead, the road curved into the unknown. He rose unsteadily, heart pounding, and began walking, boots crunching in rhythm with a terror that would not leave him. The mile marker, the radio, the phantom headlights, were they real? Or a hallucination birthed by isolation, exhaustion, and fear? Martin did not stop to question it. He walked, step by step, through the blizzard, knowing some part of him would never escape that frozen convoy, waiting somewhere just beyond the snow, watching, waiting for the next traveler to pass mile 666.